Yeah, no, I've got like super, well, as fast as you can get. Is that a bit better?
But you're going to it over Wi-Fi, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I'm physically plugged in. I'm one of these.
You're using it. I could do that. I just hang on, turn that down.
There's no need to. I'm just one of these wankers who's like, I have to find every single way I possibly can to be superior to you, and having a blue cable plugged into my computer is one of them, you know.
That's accurate. That's better. All right, my lighting looks better than yours.
Yeah, it actually, it does. Who knew? You're the photographer. Now, Carly, I'm going to take it as a compliment that last week I edited the video, and clearly it was so good that you've just immediately turned around and gone, no, we're doing it remotely now. There'll be no editing. I've obviously just put you to shame, and I'm going to take it as a compliment.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I'm just sick of seeing your face, if I'm honest. No.
So for everyone watching, yes, this is a little bit different this week. We have to do it remotely due to scheduling conflicts and other things this week, but it's going to be the same shit talking, the same fun, the same going through all the madness of the world that we're in right now. And Carly, I think you have specially chosen a few topics for the purpose of making me cringe this week.
Oh, there's always a few. There's one in there that's a curveball that's just there to upset everyone. But we'll start with good news. So have you got good news?
Oh, you know what? I didn't actually. You go first. I will come up with something.
I don't know if it's good news, but I had a good weekend after my shit time. I took my partner down to my favorite place, which is the Otways in Victoria.
I saw some photos. Looked epic.
Yeah. We did all that. We did, because that's like, honestly, of all the places I've been, not to brag, but I've been to 70 different countries. And for me to say that the Otways is the most spectacular place on earth, I think that's a pretty big compliment. But yeah, I took him into the California redwoods. I took him to a couple of waterfalls, and yeah, he'd never seen it before. So that was nice.
All right. You know what? I haven't had a great week, so I'm going to go with the fact that I crashed out and fell asleep at about 9 o'clock last night and didn't wake up until about 7:30 this morning. And that has got to be one of the most incredible sleeps that I have had in probably literally years. So I'm just going to say, hey, a good night's sleep. That can be my win for this week.
You know what? Don't underestimate the importance of sleep. Sleep is so important.
Made such a difference, and I would like to do it again tonight.
Do you know what I said to you, obviously off camera, but I'm so done with summer. Like, I know everyone's saying the hottest summer on record. It's just summer. And this is the first proper summer we've had in ages, and I'm over it.
Like, okay, yes, it was more of a summer than the last few summers immediately before it, but it was not a summer. It was not a summer the way that I remember growing up. I remember growing up, we had a pipeline that ran along behind the house that I grew up in, and that was basically our backyard. We didn't really have a backyard, just a little concrete area with a clothesline in the middle of it. But then behind that, we had this big grassy pipeline. And so we would play cricket out there and ride our bikes out there and just do all kinds of nonsense out there. And I can remember there would be consecutive 40-plus degree days. And there would certainly every year, there'd be at least 4 or 5 consecutive 35-plus days, at least, probably a couple of times every summer. And honestly, it just isn't happening like that at the moment. And so this nonsense about hottest summer on record, I think what they're doing, they're saying, trust us, we're the experts, we have the measuring instruments. But people aren't stupid, and their disbelief can only be pushed so far. And I think increasingly what's happening is people are going like, yeah, but your instruments are wrong. I'm sorry, I don't care what the number says on the little screen. Something is screwy here.
Honestly, it feels like sometimes when it comes to, I'm going to call it propaganda because it is propaganda, that we are living through a North Korean psyop. Like, don't believe what your eyes see, believe what we tell you. And like, I'm 39, right? So I moved to Australia in the 90s. And when we first arrived, I remember like, we didn't know what El Nino was back then, but it was a really wet summer. And then the summers after that were like the Sahara Desert. I remember because we were in drought, so water restrictions. And I was in Sunbury, so it was all the, the 2-minute showers and all that nonsense. But we, back then, kids, I don't know if you know this, but we didn't have air conditioning. Most houses didn't. And what you had was, if you're lucky, a fan, and you'd close the blinds and just try and bunker down and, sprinkle yourself with water.
Spray bottles. That's what you had. You had a fan and a spray bottle. I remember it well.
Or the wet face washer on your head.
Yeah.
And what you do is fill the bath up and you go sit in the cold bath, or if you're lucky, you go to the local pool with everyone else in your suburb and just burn yourself to a crisp.
And share bacteria. I can remember I used to go to Waggunya, so that's where my grandparents lived at the time, for summer holiday. Sorry?
So you know, this is not wine.
I choose to believe it is. Does it identify as wine? Have you asked it whether it's wine? Because it might have a different opinion.
It might be. Yeah, sorry, continue.
We haven't seen a miracle like that for 2,000 years. No. So I would go to Waggunya for summer holidays over Christmas and New Year's. My grandparents lived there. And they had 3 acres. They bought 6 blocks of land when it first got subdivided in Waggunya. It was a nothing town. It was dirt cheap land. And they bought 6 of them side by side, half an acre each. We had 3 acres to play on. And they built a house on one at one end. And then we had 2.5 acres of just uninterrupted play space. It was great. But the ground would get so dry that you would get cracks opening up in almost like block-shaped formations. You just have these big blocks of dirt. And in between them, cracks large enough that marbles and occasionally like matchbox cars would just disappear down them and you'd never get them back. Yeah. And I used to be terrified because I thought if you slipped into one of those, you'd just be free falling to the center of the earth. I wondered why lava wasn't coming up out of them because you just couldn't see the bottom of them.
Yeah.
And that was a normal summer. That was just summer. And I remember the 42, 43 degree days that you would get. And I'm sorry, we haven't had that kind of a summer in 20 years.
No, we haven't. I don't think we've had those summers since I was in high school. I really don't. I remember those days you'd like put your cordial in the freezer the night before and you'd run around with like this block of ice in your drink bottle all day. And, you're just dying in the shade at school. And there used to be a rumor. Can anyone confirm that if it got over 36, you were sent home? I don't ever remember being sent home to high school.
Never happened.
Never.
No, never happened.
No.
Right, but we're not...
You'd be put in a safe room now if you were bothered by the heat. You go to the safe room.
Right. That's right. And they've all got air conditioning and everything now too. But last time I checked, this wasn't a podcast about the weather.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. As usual, we are off topic. So I am going to...
I'm pretty sure that's why people love us, though, is because we can't stay on topic. Throw us a comment. Do you want us to be more disciplined and stay on topic, or do you like the rabbit holes?
Otherwise, if they wanted that, they'd go watch bloody mainstream media. Welcome to the night.
True.
It'd be fun. So obviously the big story, we've got 2, and pick one. We've got the Epstein files or we've got Zelensky and Trump. Where do you want to start?
Gosh, there's a couple of other ones. Look, let's knock the Epstein files out of the way because I think that's one that we can touch on sort of relatively quickly. This has been really interesting. So obviously anyone that follows me on social media, I'm pretty keen to see the Epstein files. I want to see the files. I want to see prosecutions. I want to see people go to prison. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison for having aided and abetted human trafficking, and yet none of the customers to which those humans were trafficked have been prosecuted yet. Like that seems to me like an egregious situation for us to have. Now, to his credit, Donald Trump does appear to be trying to fix that. I think they've made some terrible mistakes in their rhetoric. I think they were always going to have trouble getting this list out to the public. I think Pam Bondi has made some mistakes in her rhetoric. Trump has made some mistakes in his. They've made promises that they couldn't keep. And now they've created this sort of cynicism that I'm seeing from all sorts of people, some of them who I know quite well online, big international figures who I know personally, and I'm watching them become really deeply cynical on this issue, and it's actually really beginning to harm Trump's credibility in the eyes of those people. I disagree. I have a very different perspective on it, but what do you think?
Oh, look, I was a little bit outraged, I'm not going to lie, because there's ways of doing things, and I understand that, when it comes to rolling out something like this, everyone wants to be first. I got it. I got the scoop, and I utterly detest the word influencers. I really do. Like if I hear influencer one more time, like shut up.
I'm sorry, Carly, but you realize you are one. This last 8 weeks of torture having to put up with you every week was worth it just to get that look.
Yuck. No, but do you know, it just seems like influence is someone that will tell you about their skincare routine, not someone that's helping you break down news or talking about it.
World.
Yeah. And look, what I love about independent journalism is that most people go into topics because it's genuinely interesting to them specifically. Sure. So like, for example, Candace Owens and Macron and Brigitte, she's fascinated by it, so she digs into it. You got House and Habit, who's interested with like the clandestine meetings at Mar-a-Lago and stuff. And that's interesting to me. And then you got like Viva Fry or Dan Bongino or whoever. Everyone has their own nuance. And so when these people go and then they get into some like weirdly coordinated campaign and they come out with binders saying phase 1, like the most transparent government in the world, I was like, I don't like this at all. And then I've got to say, like, I forget her real name. Is it Chica? The lives a TikTok girl, like smiling. Like,
I forget her real name, but yeah.
I was like, babe, you're talking about children and pedophilia. That grin, inappropriate. And like, so House Inhabit, who I love, Jess Krause, I actually left a comment on her picture because to be fair, Jess was in the back with her head down and a hat on. And then you had like DC Drano, Libs of TikTok, Shinovic, and a few other people. And, they're smiling with the binders. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, until you tell us what's in those binders, shut the fuck up and stop smiling. And it was under an embargo. They couldn't speak about it. But like everything from beginning to end, it was terribly coordinated because what it's done now is make people turn around and go, oh, Trump's never going to do it. They're just like the rest of them. Yeah. And it's like, sorry, go.
No, they've really stuffed up the way that this has been handled. So let's zoom back out. I do want to come back to exactly what you're talking about there and the optics of this and the use of influences and so forth, because there is something to be said there. But I want to zoom out for a second and take a sort of a 30,000 foot view. The reason why we don't have more is because the FBI withheld it. So let's make sure that we are talking about who the real villain is here. The New York FBI office lied to the Attorney General and said they'd handed over everything when they hadn't. Pam Bondi has been criticized for, even an amateur could have been able to tell all the documents weren't there. Well, she went back to them multiple times because she could tell that all the documents weren't there. She's not an idiot. She's not out of her depth. She's being stonewalled and lied to by the FBI. That should be a federal crime for which people should go to prison. Now, interestingly, on that breaking news from just this morning, just before we started recording this, the New York FBI, the head of the New York office of the FBI, has now been fired, dismissed. He says he wasn't given a reason. I don't think he needs to be given a reason. I think it's pretty clear. We now know for a fact that there are thousands of documents that were not handed over. Okay, so this isn't Trump withholding it. This isn't Vance withholding it. This isn't Pam Bondi withholding it. It's not even Kash Patel withholding it because this all happened before he was made the FBI director. This is an FBI field office taking it upon itself to try and thwart the purposes and intentions of the duly elected administration. That's the villain here. However, we can't let Trump and everyone else off scot-free for completely mishandling the ball. Just because they're not the ones withholding the information doesn't mean that they failed, that they haven't made some serious mistakes. Coming back to the issue of these influences, we've talked before about the fact that neither you nor I are journalists. And I semi-regularly, I will bang on about this until people roll their eyes because they're sick of hearing it. I am not a journalist, and I have enormous respect for trained journalists, the people that actually do their job well with integrity and try and maintain neutrality and objectivity. That is a skill set. If I wanted to become a journalist, I would have to go and study. There are skills that I lack, right, that a journalist learns in university. That doesn't mean every journalist is good, but it does mean that someone like myself, as a political commentator, that's what I am, I'm a commentator, should not get too big for my boots. And this is what's happened here with some of these influencers, where they've gone, well, I have a big audience and I talk about the news, therefore I must be a journalist. Well, you can see in their demeanor in that moment, dealing with a story of human trafficking, horrific sex abuse, including underage sex abuse, etc., that they're sitting there grinning like Cheshire cats from ear to ear because they are overawed by the moment of, wow, look where I am, instead of the journalistic approach of, look at the story and the subject matter that we're dealing with here. Let's keep to the facts. They made it in that moment about themselves, which is the opposite of what a good journalist does. Now, a lot of journalists do it, but it's the opposite of what a good journalist does. And so I think the combination of mishandling from Trump and Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and just missing the moment on the part of those influencers has just turned this it's just made a mess of it. And I'm really pissed off about it, actually. Yeah,
I think there was a lot of this there. And I've said this before about Candace Owens, and I'm going to say it, like, I want to be careful because I really do like Jessica Krause, and I appreciate that they've put a lot of effort in to do what they're doing. But there's and like Jess Krause went out and defended this on her stories. And like, this is the important thing about not being a sycophant for people that you admire. Because I think the way Jess has handled it is terrible. She's gone out and saying, like, I'm proud to have done this. I've been here. Like, I've been putting in the time. I was talking about Epstein 3 years ago. I had a right to be here. I'm like, no one was questioning your right. No one at all. It's the way you're doing it and the way you're like, it's, you know, carrot on a string kind of thing. I think it's like, when it comes to the Epstein files, we're talking about decades of sexual abuse. This is sinister stuff, and we know it's evil and we know it's terrible. And everyone, the American citizens and the citizens of the world, deserve to know this. You being a gatekeeper because you want that 5 minutes to feel superior because you got the information first. You are no different to mainstream media when they gatekeep information.
Let me add a nuance here. I don't begrudge them accepting the invitation. I don't begrudge anyone accepting the invitation to go to the White House and be one of the people that gets that binder first. But I think the optics around, the photograph, the rhetoric around it, now apparently what they're saying is that Pam Bondi did tell them up front that there isn't really a bombshell inside that binder. But to be honest, everyone up until that point in time thought that there was. Yeah. Those influencers would have gone there believing that there was, and then being told right at the very last second as they're about to be handed the binder that there isn't. So I'm willing to cut them some slack for getting caught up in the moment. They're going to the White House, all of that. But that is what a proper journalist is able to do, that most influencers and most political commentators, and I'd include myself in that, would I have handled it better? I would argue I would likely have handled it better because I've been doing this for 16 years and I've been to the halls of power in Australia and so forth. And so I would argue I probably would have handled it better. Would I have handled it as well as a good journalist? Almost certainly not, because there is a level of training and professionalism that comes with that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's fairly accurate. There was a level of amateur hour there, but also like Pam Bondi went on, I think it was Jessie on Fox, and said like it's disturbing, right? As she talked as if she'd read it. What was disturbing? It was flight logs and a black book. So was Pam Bondi lying? And so this is the problem. Like, you already have a heightened level of awareness around this, and everyone's already supercharged. And if Pam Bondi's going to go onto Fox and say, I've read it, it's terrible, it's on my desk, and then the next day the binders come out and it's a nothing burger, that just makes people go, well, now you guys are gaslighting us. Who are the real villains here? And it's just, I think it was poorly handled. And I think those binders happened because she knew, like, the rhetoric online was like, where are they? Kash Patel said day one it was coming out. And so everyone was getting really angry, and they're like, well, we've got to do something. I think they did the worst thing they could have. If I was in power, not that I
ruled the world.
What I would have done is like come out and go, right, this is the issue here. We're being stonewalled by our own FBI. This is a New York thing. We want to do this. We are on this, and we hear you. We're angry with you. That would have been the way to handle it.
And they are doing that, but they've done it after the debacle with the binders, and it's too late at that point. You've already broken people's trust. You've given them an expectation that you've not then met. Look, it is a tricky one. We're dealing with a crime that reached to the highest levels of power. I mean, we're led to believe that a former president in the form of Bill Clinton is almost certainly in those flight logs and is almost certainly implicated. Prince Andrew of the UK, we know, was an associate and is implicated in all kinds of different things. This has to be approached with the greatest level of gravitas, and that's what we failed to see. They built a landmine. They fabricated a landmine of their own making, and then they stood on it firmly, and then they went into damage control mode for a self-inflicted wound. The whole thing's been ridiculous.
And I don't think it can be overstated just how serious this evidence could be when it comes out. And like, there's a level of, they want to be able to pursue this, right? To get indictments, you need to not jeopardize potential juries and all that sort of stuff. So I get that. But like, this could be potentially cataclysmic across the board for people who have held positions of power for like the last couple of decades and pushed us into things like whether it's Hollywood or politics. So that's why the Epstein files are so important, because if it comes out, like, it's allegedly, but like highly insinuated that Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, all these people are on it, like that would immediately remove Bill Gates from everything. Like, that's it. You're done, mate. And Bill Gates right now is trying to release genetically modified mosquitoes in Queensland. Yeah. So there's a level of like severity to this.
Yeah. So what we need to see from here is them actually getting their priorities in order, rather than trying to get a PR win, actually just do the job and handle things correctly and handle things well. they succumbed to the pressure to deliver something, and in the end, they delivered nothing, which is worse than having actually just said, "Hey guys, we need more time." But we need to see firings at the FBI, which, to their credit, we are seeing. We are seeing some accountability at the FBI. We need to see these files come out, and the next thing they deliver on this, the next time they make a promise, they had bloody well better deliver. Otherwise, it is going to start to end the careers of some of these appointments. I mean, if Pam Bondi has another debacle like that, it's a lot of pressure is going to come on Trump to replace her as AG. If Cash can't get those files out of the FBI and into Pam Bondi's hands, it's going to create a lot of pressure on Cash. These are people that I do believe in. I do believe they're competent, and I do believe they can deliver. But they have been, I think, they've prioritized the optics and the speed too much. And people like you and I are partly to blame for that. We want to see the Epstein files. We're joining the chorus of voices. But as you said, they could have handled it better. They could have explained, hey, we need more time. We need to do this carefully. If they'd never given us the expectation, then they wouldn't have this disaster on their hands.
Well, this is the kind of a problem of Trump's own making, right? Like, he's the master of like revving up the crowd and getting everyone like invested. Well, everyone's invested now, so it's the onus is on you to handle this delicately and do it properly, because like the mob will turn on you. That's just inevitably what will happen. So I don't know. Do you reckon we'll ever actually see it?
I think we will, but I think it's probably now 6 months away. I think they have to put it off, and they have to really rethink their entire approach, their entire strategy. Pam Bondi needs to actually go through it and think about it from a prosecutor's perspective and what's going to be ruled as inadmissible. And if they put it all out into public, I guarantee you there will be mistrial after mistrial, because they cannot find an unbiased jury. Like that's the reality. And again, the issue wasn't the process that they have undergone. The issue was the promises that they made are not compatible with a good process that leads to an outcome of convictions.
Yeah. And look, this is the problem with the world we live in today. Like, you know, when that sort of stuff goes around the world, wildfire. I mean, we're seeing this now. Like, we're going to go into Zelenskyy in a second, but there was a 45-minute clip of Trump, Zelenskyy, and JD Vance talking, and all that got clipped was that final bit where they're all talking over each other, and then, you know, it goes around the world instantly. And it wasn't until you watch the whole thing you realize Trump was being really nice the whole time. It's just that last bit where it got really heated. It's the same with the Epstein files. Like, you have to be really delicate with this, because everyone is like on the edge of their seat, ready to explode.
Well, you remember when Trump visited, when he was Trump 1.0, went and visited Japan, and the clip that went all over the media was of the prime minister. The prime minister of Japan was delicately shaking some of the koi fish food out of his container, and then Trump dumping his. What they didn't show you was the full clip where, yes, the Prime Minister of Japan is shaking some out, and Trump follows suit and shakes some out, and then the Prime Minister of Japan dumps the remainder of his, and then Trump dumps the remainder of his. They didn't show you that. And so it's not surprising at all that in a confrontation like what happened with Zelenskyy in the White House, they are going to clip the little bit that they think allows them to make Trump look like the villain. What's happening, though, and you've talked a lot about this before, is that the truth gets around the world so much faster now. And their tactics haven't actually really evolved to keep up with that. And so, there are people who are sucked in. There are certainly people who just consume mainstream media, and that's that. They're sucked in by this nonsense. But that number of people is diminishing over time, and the number of people who are coming across the truth on X or Facebook or YouTube or elsewhere is increasing with time. And so these tactics are beginning to backfire. And I've got to say, I mean, there are lots of people that are just mindlessly, you know, we have to have World War III with Russia because the Donbass region or something, you know, places that most people wouldn't be able to find on a map. Those people exist, but I think their number is diminishing.
Do you know what I'm really fatigued by? Just across the board, this entire rhetoric of just because Donald Trump said it, it's immediately bad. Donald Trump, bad. So it doesn't matter. Like, Donald Trump could come out and say we should keep all children safe and happy at home, and everybody like, how dare you? Like, all children should die. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter what it is. Trump, bad. Elon, bad. And I just find it really like fatiguing, but also to a point where it's just like, how are you willingly telling us that you're unintelligent, like you're an idiot? Because that's all. Like, if that's the only thing you can say is, oh, Trump said it, therefore it's bad, I have no respect for you, and I'm not interested in having a conversation with you.
Yeah. And what's extraordinary is the lack of historical self-awareness. Let's go back to Sarah Palin when she was a senator and then she tried to be a presidential candidate for a little while there. She's from Alaska. She made the joke about, I can see Russia from my house, which isn't literally true. But yeah, there is a place that is called Alaska. It's an island off the point that you can stand on and you can see part of what is Russia. But she was guffawed at and, Cold War thinking, trying to pretend that Putin is the villain and Russia is the villain. That wasn't that long ago. Mm-hmm. That was 10 years ago.
Do you know what? George Bush was driving Putin around in his pickup on his ranch only 15 years ago. Yeah. And he wasn't called a Putin puppet then. And do you know what I've loved? This is nuanced, but this came out yesterday. The Peter Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was signing something, and a Hillary Clinton walks into this. She posts something on X basically saying, oh, you wouldn't want to make Putin mad. And then Hegseth replies with a photo of her, some statesman from Russia and a little red button, and talking about their diplomacy and stuff then. So it's try as you might, the truth is coming out. It's it's slow and it's tedious and it's fucking drawing teeth, but, they can't get away with it anymore. Trump 1.0, there's no way that story would have got taken control. That's it, But this time around, people are starting to go, hang on a minute. And can we just talk about, this isn't political, but Zelensky, I don't do coke, right? I've never done coke. I don't know anything about it. But I know someone who's Zelensky is fucking high.
Yeah. Look, I can neither confirm nor deny the allegation. But what is very obvious to me is that Zelensky began to believe his own bullshit. Yeah. And he got caught up in his own myth. So I will credit Zelensky with this. When Russia first invaded, a lot of people, myself included, said that Russia probably weren't actually going to follow through. They massed all their troops, they massed all their tanks. I said, along with most others, that this is probably a pressure tactic. It's probably to give him leverage in negotiations, and he's probably not going to actually invade because of the impact it would have on global oil markets, Russian exports, blah, 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 blah. Well, turns out Putin had other ideas. He did invade. It did have all of those impacts. We were right. It had all of those impacts, but Putin chose decided that was a price he was willing to pay. To his credit, Zelensky stood his ground in those early days. Now, let's not forget, in the first couple of weeks of that war, the whole world thought that Ukraine was going to be pushed over very quickly. No one came to their aid with anything more than sort of token amounts of money which couldn't really be spent effectively at such short notice anyway. So Ukraine largely stood alone. They had special forces in their airport just outside of Kyiv. They had Russian tank columns heading down the main highways towards Kyiv and ended up only a few tens of miles away where they got stuck for ridiculous logistical reasons, but that's another matter. In that moment, Zelensky said, I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. I'm going to continue to rally the people and we're going to defend ourselves. Yeah. I will give Zelensky full credit for courage. In that moment, in that time, in that passage of time, those couple of months, tremendous courage, worthy of any global leader. That's credit where it's due. But then along came the money. Along came the aid. Along came Zelensky, suddenly cast as the central character in the great war between the global titans. And he begins to believe this mythos that he's built around himself. And what he's become since then is an election cancelling, opponent imprisoning, arresting and imprisoning, media buying and owning, government owning tyrant who has enjoyed enormous amounts of goodwill. I mean, the amount of money that has been spent making him seem like a hero is phenomenal globally. If you were to add up the value of all the columns,
cover on Vogue.
Yeah. You add up the value of all of that. He has been turned into a living saint and he's believed his own bullshit. And what that has led to is a situation where Trump is exactly right. Zelensky does not want this war to end because when the war ends, he's no longer the globe's central character. He is only relevant because there is a war going on in his land. And he literally came out and said to the European Union that he expects this war to go on for a very, very long time. He's got Trump, his main ally, the only reason why Ukraine has been able to keep fighting for this long, saying we need to bring this war to an end. And he's out there telling the EU this war is going to go on for a very, very long time. And the kids, the conscripts, I mean, there are videos showing Ukrainian police just literally jumping out of vehicles and kidnapping people off the streets of Ukraine in order to press gang them into service on the front lines. This is horrific stuff. If Russia did any of the things that Zelensky is doing now, we would condemn them. And we know we would because we have condemned them when they've done it in the past. Yes, Putin is inclined towards being a dictator. Yes, without question, Putin has taken out his opponents. Without question, Russia engages in propaganda over its own people. Conscription is definitely a thing. We've condemned it whenever Putin's done it. Why are we making a double standard for Zelensky? I said right at the beginning of this war, don't look for a good guy. There is no good guy in this war. And that has been absolutely borne out. And yeah, Zelensky, honestly, if he's not careful, he's going to find himself having an accident somewhere because he's just going to become too inconvenient and his ego will be unable to allow him to step aside when he needs to.
I mean, look, I'm no pretend to be any like foreign affairs expert or like war general, but there's a lot of things here that never add up to me. Like war just makes certain people rich, right? Like at the end of the day, the military industrial complex just lines the pockets of them people. And like when you talk about those conscripts, right? Like I just want to be clear because like I don't know, like you and I are on X all day, every day. Not everyone is. So there are videos, and this is like this isn't anecdotal. This is real. It's happening. There's there's hundreds of videos of this where a young man of service age, like maybe 18 to like 40. Is literally driven up on by a van and 4 people get out and grab him off the street and he has to go and serve in the military because Ukraine doesn't have enough soldiers. They're literally just grabbing people off the street and making them go to fight war. Now, I just want to paint that picture because I feel like people, because it's happening so far away, people go, it's not my problem, I don't really care. I want you to imagine your father, your brother, your husband, your boyfriend, your best friend walking their dog down the street. A van pulls up, grabs them, and makes them go to the front lines where they inevitably get shot and killed.
You will never see them again. You will never see them again.
That is the reality for Ukraine men right now. And I don't think people realize that. The thing that frustrates me about war when we talk about it in the 21st century, it's so like it's so like up in the ether. Like it's not tangible. I'm not saying I want bombs to fall on people's houses again. What I'm saying is like in the early 1900s, when it was like bomb threats and there was broken buildings and stuff, you saw what war was. You saw the death. Now the death, we're so far removed from it, and we're so desensitized thanks to Hollywood. When we see people get maimed and blown up and destroyed and killed, whatever, you're like, But the only thing that we have left, and I'm losing hope in this too because of the youth crime in Victoria, is that if you can picture that being yourself or someone that you love, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more real. And this is Ukraine, and this is what Trump's trying to get across. Like, we don't want this war anymore. We don't want people to die. And Trump has said that. And you don't see the mainstream media putting that out there.
It's really interesting to me that if Ukrainians arrived by boat in Australia, we would all be saying, or a huge number of people, including myself, by the way, because I am pro-refugee and pro-immigrant, would be saying we need to let them in. We need to care for these people. But you take those same Ukrainians, and instead of being on a boat on our northern shore, they're being grabbed in vans and sent to the front lines. All of a sudden, we don't care. All of a sudden, that person, because they're not close enough for us to see, they're over there, like you said, suddenly we don't care about them. Can we also take a moment and reflect on the stupidity of Australia's involvement? And this is not a partisan thing, Labor or Liberal. Dutton and Albanese are both morons in the way that they're approaching the Ukraine situation, taking a hardline stance contrary to our most important trading partner and military partner in the form of the US. But also, can we rewind, 6 months now? Australia promised something 45 or something Abrams tanks, 49 Abrams tanks, to go to Ukraine to aid in the war effort. This is so stupid on so many levels. I'll try and blast through them quickly, but there are just the layer. This is like an onion of stupidity. Every time you peel back another layer of stupidity, there's another one underneath. Firstly, recklessly stupid when our defense force is so inadequately equipped in the first place. We spent a fortune on those tanks to get them to Australia, training our people how to use them, how to make the most of them. They've literally never seen combat. They've never been used anywhere. But they are a part of our defense force, which is already woefully inadequate. So that's dumb. Secondly, 6 months later, they still haven't been sent. You know why? They can't figure out how to transport them. Do you have any idea what that says about us and our military and logistical capabilities, that we as a country that is currently in peacetime are unable to figure out the logistics to send 50 tanks into a country that supposedly desperately needs them and 6 months later hasn't got them? Thirdly, Ukraine do not use Western tanks. They're not trained on them. They don't understand them. They will have to be completely retrained from the Russian tanks that they have used before to the entirely new weapon systems, new software systems. Tanks are highly sophisticated things with guidance systems and communications and radars and active defense and all kinds of crazy technology going on. The Ukrainians have lost basically all of their competent tank crews for operating their own tanks. This has been a ridiculously wasteful war in terms of human lives. And tanks, as soon as they enter a battlefield, everyone wants to take out that tank. On both the Russian and the Ukrainian side, they've lost most of their tank crews. What we're taking now are the equivalent of those conscripts being dragged off the street, sticking them into multi-million dollar hardware paid for by Australian taxpayers, giving them a crash course and sending them out of the front line where they're just going to be taken out by an enemy anti-tank missile very, very quickly because they don't understand the machine that they're in, and they're in a tactical situation that is just a nightmare. I mean, I cannot imagine anything worse than to be on that defense in depth type of trench warfare front line in the modern technological age with drones and missiles and everything else. Hell on earth. And we are going to ship our tanks halfway around the world to put them in the hands of conscripts so that they can go and die on the inside of an Australian tank instead of on the inside of a Russian one. And we say that that's us helping. Yeah. Can you tell I'm pissed off? This is fucking madness.
You know what else is madness is that we're still fighting fucking wars with people and with foreign money. Like this is the thing that, and you look at the left, and this is where I get really mad. And like the politics around this is Trump doesn't want the war to end. Trump wants the war to end, so therefore it must be going. That is the current rhetoric, thanks to the Democrats, thanks to the left. You know, we're going to go in there, we're going to fight. I thought the Democrats and the left were anti-war. I thought they were anti-establishment. Now they are warmongers. They're like, send more boots. Like Keir Starmer coming out and saying, we're going to put boots on the ground. The bit that he forgot to, like the media forgot to add, was the last bit saying, we can't do that without the support of the US. But all you heard is that UK is going to go and put boots on the ground. Who's going? And this is the... Who's going? My boyfriend is at fighting age. He's not going to fucking war. Let me tell you. I'll kill him first before he gets to the fucking UK front line. Let me tell you. But you know what I mean? Like this is the craziness. Like no one wants to fight this war. We don't have like in World War I, World War II. It was considered an honor to fight for your country. It was considered like brave and young people underage were going to fight on the front lines. And then they saw the very real reality of war, and you realize, actually, I don't want to be there. We saw it with the Vietnam War when it was conscription, and so many people didn't want to go. And now every war that's progressively happened after the 70s, fewer and fewer people want to sign up to be in the military. The people who do go either are still patriotic or the others just want the benefits, right? How many Australians who are cheering this war on are willing to go and die on those front lines? And I just want to bring up that guy from Australia who went to fight for Ukraine and now is being captured by Russian militants.
Yeah. And this is the guy that was reported as being dead, and then they found that he actually wasn't. Is that the same guy?
Yeah, the school teacher. Yeah. And now he's being tortured as a prisoner of war. I'm like, all right, let's see you guys go. Like, because you're going to talk your mouth. You're going to run your mouth and talk about how we need to go fight this war. You sign up. You go grab that gun. You sit in that tank. You get you get fired at and lose your life. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I'm not letting my countrymen go. Fuck that. No. And I don't want my tax money go to that.
So Keir Starmer's comments are interesting because I did a video about this on my socials. The media also failed to report that boots on the ground, planes in the air comment was strictly in the context of a peace deal having been negotiated and a peacekeeping force being in place. He was not saying that in relation to the ongoing war, and yet that nuance was not reported either. So not only did he say this, we need the US support for this, he also said, for now, what we're going to do is keep sending aid, military aid, and keep the economic sanctions on Russia. That was all he was willing to do while the war was ongoing. And everything else he said was in the context of a peace having been negotiated. But can we also stop and reflect for a moment on just how much the world has to have lost its mind in order for Putin, the world's worst, most violent, autocratic dictator, blah, 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 depending on which moment in history you're talking about. But the media have certainly said lots of mean things about him. And Trump, the crazy warmongering, we're going to have World War III if Trump gets elected guy, they are the two trying to shut a war down. A war that is between the two of them. They're saying, hey, let's shut this down. And Europe's leaders, the UK Prime Minister, the Australian Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, and the Ukrainian President are all saying, no, we have to keep the war going. Let's keep this war going for a little bit longer. We are literally in an upside down world.
Do you know what infuriates me about this? Is like, this is just general observational psychology. Trump and Putin are egotistical. Like, I don't think that's like not groundbreaking, right? Putin is a nationalist. He was KGB. He grew up in the Soviet Union. He wants to restore Russia to its former glory. That's why he wants to annex Ukraine and bring it back in. They've already taken Crimea. They took Donbass. They want to take the rest of it, right? Because Ukraine, before the Romanovs, was still part of Russia. It's like in and out, in and out, in and out, right? He wants it back. That is Putin's goal. Putin is all about his legacy, being the restorer of Russian, right? And once you understand that, you go, okay, it makes sense. I'm not condoning what Putin's doing. I'm not a Putin apologist. What I'm saying is I get what he's doing. And then on the flip side, you have Trump. Trump is America first. Trump wants to care about the American people. He doesn't want to send taxpayer money over to a foreign war, particularly with one of our biggest adversaries, right? It's basically a proxy war. And so what you need to understand here is neither Trump nor Putin want to be the people that press the big red button. And by that, I mean nukes. Like, neither of them wants to be the person known in history books that flattened half the world thanks to nuclear war. So you understand that, you go, okay, so now we're just talking about paperwork. This is all just like how to shuffle some papers so that everyone gets happy. But no, you don't get that. And this is why I'm so angry with the left. They want war. They want chaos. They want anarchy because they've moved so far to the left. That's the only option because you can't have peace.
They're actually saying it now. Like Zelenskyy is actually coming out saying, no, this war is going to go on for a very, very long time. European leaders saying, no, we can't negotiate peace. It's quite incredible. But what this comes back to, your observation about the left and the Democrats being the ones that used to be the party that was anti-war under RFK, of course, most famously. Not RFK, JFK, most famously. What you've got is proof of my thesis that I put online some time ago that actually the current American administration is old school Democrat. And what's happened is old school Democrat has actually taken over the Republican Party because their own party rotted so badly that they had to abandon it. But they took with them the best parts of the Republican Party. And then the war hawks, the old school, the swamp of both parties has now united under the Republican and Democrat banner. So you've got your Rhinos, your war hawk Republicans, you've got your old and bitter Democrats, versus now a new unity party that has happened under the Republican name, but really is actually made up mostly of Democrats who simply didn't keep up with the party as it changed. The party changed and left them behind and became this animal that it's become. And they stood there and said, well, I'm still the same person. Where's my home now? They've actually found a home in a sort of a corner of the Republican Party, which for the moment, for the time being, is in the ascendancy. And they've got the White House, they've got the Senate, they've got the lower house or the House of Representatives. They've got the opportunity to really make a wonderful difference. But actually, it's old school Democrats doing it.
Yeah. What I find really interesting here as well is, like, you know, take it away from the war for a second. It's just looking for the general call to arms and the general calls to violence coming from the left. They are openly calling for assassinations and murders. We've just seen like that CEO of the insurance company get murdered in plain sight. And this is the bit that gets me. Like, women, are you okay? You are now glorifying a fucking murderer. Like, I get this weird thing in women where they start to look at Ted Bundy and go, oh, I could fix him. I've never thought this way. I'll never think this way. But I just want to grab these women and like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Ask any man that's been through a bad breakup and they will happily tell you that women are not okay. You women, you need help.
Dude, I know this because I'll tell you a really quick story. I'm going to dance around the specifics so this person doesn't know who I'm talking about them. I just watched a close friend of mine go through a breakup, and it was messy because it was involved between my partner and I as well. Like it was mutual, like we knew everyone. And like it was all hunky-dory in the beginning, and I was like, oh, that's nice, you know? And then and G and I are like, we couldn't be more relaxed if we tried. Like we're like car seats, like we recline all the way back, like we're just chill. And then when we see this, like, oh, such and such said this, we're like, oh, that's unusual. And then such and such. Anyway, the long story short, all of a sudden it blows up, right? He said, she said, rah, 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 rah. And now I'm getting all the one-way vision from one person and my partner's getting all the one-way stories from them. And then we like reconvene with the discuss. We're like, that's not what I got told. He's like, well, that's not what I got told. I'm like, someone's lying. Anyway, as these things inevitably do, it was, when I say spectacular breakup, it's probably the worst I've ever seen, in my opinion, worst I've seen. And, there's text messages and there's tirades and all whatever. And I'm just like, I'm watching all this shit. And like, I said to my friend, I'm like, this is all you, babe. I'm sorry. You are the problem. This is you. Oh, women, blah, blah. I'm like, no. Your behavior is so out of line. I'm like, I don't know the other guy from a bar of soap really, but I just need to see the story, like, zoom out a bit. I'm like, Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to rant. Like, I'm going off. Like, I'm fine. Wait till it's International Women's Day, because I let rip on that day.
Are you turning into a men's rights activist, Carly? Is that what's happening here?
No, I just want fucking common sense. I'm sorry, and our American friends will be really upset. Welcome to Australia. We swear a lot.
Yeah.
But we, especially when we're trying to be emphatic. But my issue with women is like they've been indoctrinated. Like, this is my frustration, and I feel empathy, and then I'm frustrated. I want to strangle them all at the same time, right? And I don't mean that physically. I mean just metaphorically, just like
That's right.
Like,
you can mean it physically. It's fine.
Women have started to believe that they are holier than thou, that they are superior, that men should just worship the ground they walk on simply for existing. I'm like, that's not the case, mate. It's a two-way street. And if women are going to contribute to this conversation, then you better be prepared to show up physically too. And so, like, when I see this stuff, like they're basically glorifying Luigi Mangione because he murdered someone. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? You are sick. You are not okay. And I get it. Women love crime podcasts. Women love a challenge. But you're basically saying that you're okay with your boyfriend being an assassin. Do you hear that? Do you hear how ridiculous you are? And even just last week, just to tie it into something that happened last week, this chick goes on TikTok, because apparently that's where everyone just goes and like confesses to their crimes on fucking TikTok.
Yeah.
She goes on TikTok and she's clearly drunk because she's slurring and she's pushing her glasses up. And she's like, oh, we need to like Elon Musk, like we need to get him, formerly known as, these are her words, formerly known as assassination, She's openly calling to assassinate someone who, up until literally prior to Donald Trump's presidency, the left loved.
They all hero. Yeah.
He was a hero. But now he's not, because how dare Donald Trump everything bad? Like, that's just the only way they think, right? And so this woman's basically confessed to camera, like, this is the bit I'll never understand. I'm going to openly call for assassination and tell you that I haven't lodged my taxes in 8 years. I'm going to film it and then put it onto the internet and hope it goes viral, and then scream blue murder when you're held
when it goes viral
for your crimes.
Yeah. So
explain this stupid to me. I don't get it.
What I love is that the people in love with Luigi Mangione are the same people that scream about toxic masculinity.
Dude, I know.
How do you reconcile that?
I can't. And it's like, this is the thing that annoys me, right? And I am a common sense person, and I've always been one of the girls that's like, I hang out with the guys. I had an older brother. That's probably why. And, I always used to go to car shows and aviation shows with my brother and my dad. And like, I just found that more interesting. I was never like a girly girl, right? So maybe that's how it comes to, like, that's how it all works for me. But over time, I have watched men go from like men to these watered down, pathetic weasel soy boys. I'm sorry, that's what they are. Like, I don't want to date a man that spends more time in the bathroom than I do. Are you joking? Yeah. Like, I want a man that like knows what to do with a freaking hammer. And I cannot tell you, as someone, I am happily locked down. Can I tell you? I'm happy. But prior to that, unfortunately, I have a good 15, 16 years of dating history, and I bear witness to it. Watching men go from like relatively normal, like men can be like, when they're young, this men can be a bit stupid. That happens. Women can be too.
Lizard brain.
Time, I was like, okay, so men my age, not so great. Let's go older. Men older, bad, damaged goods, terrible divorce, and like now they're like not right. And then men younger, absolutely not. They're basically women. You sort of go, what has happened? And I know why. I know exactly what you've been told to hate yourself. I get it. Men are bad. Men are pathetic. All men are rapists. All men are terrible. Toxic masculinity. As a woman, I'm not attracted to another woman. I'm a what do you call it? Heteronormative woman.
Yeah. So from now on, I'm going to call you Goldilocks, because older is too old, younger is too young. It's just. But you found you just right. So well done, you.
Do you know what? I said to G, I was like, you're not allowed to break up with me ever, because I am never going back into that dating pool. There is no chance.
So I would place the blame for what you're observing squarely on feminism. And I'm going to be specific about the reason why, because that's a very easy throwaway line. People go, oh, well, he's just a misogynist then. Well, no, hang on.
I'll say it for you.
Disappointment can only exist in the context of expectation. You can't be disappointed if you didn't have an expectation. But if you can give an entire generation of women completely unrealistic, unachievable expectations, then you can guarantee disappointment.
Yeah.
They will never have anything but disappointment. And so what happens when you go to an entire generation of women and you say, you can do everything that men can do, only better. And if you're not living the best life of your dreams, it's because men are holding you down. And you start to see these kinds of expectations about what their life should look like and how things ought to go for them, which are completely unrealistic and cannot be achieved, then they will end up disappointed. And who will they blame? The person they were told to blame, the men. Yeah. Now you end up with a whole bunch of men who are also struggling in life, because life is tough, who aren't living their dreams either, and yet are now having women placing the blame on them for why their dreams haven't been realized yet. And when you understand that dynamic, and it was set up by the unrealistic expectations created by feminism, you understand all of a sudden why this really toxic relationship dynamic exists now, of men having accepted the blame wrongly and wearing the weight of that guilt of, oh no, I've let my woman down because she's not happy. You're a happy wife, happy life. All right. Men are supposed to make their wives happy. That's our measure of success. Is your missus happy? If you have a missus who is devoted to you, doting on you, just, serving your needs and desires, well, it must mean you're amazing, right? What's the old joke? You see an ugly bloke with a beautiful woman, you go, he's either got a big bank account or a big dick. So there's got to be something about him that's keeping her happy, right? Otherwise he wouldn't be able to achieve that. So a woman's happiness is a measure of man's success. So how do you kill men? You make sure women will never be happy. Yeah. If you can make sure that women,
I see it play out now. Like there was a thing, right? Like, on TikTok, there was a trend where it was like 6'5" finance or something like that, like what women want. And it's known, like it's been studied that on dating websites, for example, 80% of the women want the top 20% of men, but men will just whatever, right? Yeah, so women are, like women are all trying to get that top bit, the tall guy, the rich guy, like, all these things that women have this thing. I'm not joking. Like we've gone completely off track, but I think this is important. There's a trend, right, called icks. Like if a guy has, if there's an ick, you're instantly like, no. And it could be an ick like, he chews loud, or an ick like he wears like boat shoes, or, these are really superficial, stupid things.
Or he has a hobby that's, tabletop miniatures or one of these nerdy sort of things. Yep.
And this is the thing, and so what women want is to live their life. Now, if a woman's obsessed with like Stanley Cups and Hello Kitty and she can live out that little girl fantasy, but if a man happens to enjoy like, I don't know, aviation, video games, whatever, he's a boy, he's never grown up, he's terrible. Right. And I'm like, this kind of rhetoric drives me crazy because life is short, but life is also laboriously long if you're not enjoying any of it. And if you're basically telling someone they need to basically mask any of the things that make them the individual that they are because you don't like them, because that gives you an ick because you won't date them. I call this the square peg round hole theory. And I see this with women all the time. Women will grab what they believe is somewhat of an eligible man, and they don't care about personality. They don't care about values. They go, hey, he's rich, or he's successful, he looks good on paper, and he's going to impress people on Instagram. I'm going to grab him and mold him into what I want, and I'm going to beat him down until I get what I want. And then it works for a little bit until that man finally grows some balls and leaves that woman, and then he's a narcissist. Because the woman can't handle that the man actually stood up for himself, so he must be a narcissist.
That's right.
That's how women play it out now. That's exactly how it goes.
And it's quite astonishing, just watching women try and have trophy husbands, but without bringing anything to the table. A man that can,
but I won't do anything for it.
A man that can get a trophy wife, it's because he's very, very rich or very famous or has something that she wants to be the trophy of. Women want trophy husbands that will mold themselves. What I mean by a trophy husband is they're not there for the value that they they're there to mold themselves into the thing that you want to be attached to, right? That's so a trophy wife comes along and becomes whatever he wants her to be in order to, to maintain that status, that position. Why? Well, because he's rich and whatever else. But women bring nothing. They don't bring the money. They don't bring any of that necessarily. I'm generalizing here, but they still expect their husband to become a trophy husband, by which I mean to mold himself, to reshape himself, to become exactly the accessory, the handbag that she wants on Instagram and out in public, but without actually having really brought anything. And people get really upset with me because one of the things that I talk about a lot is no one is perfect just the way they are. No one is enough. There's this idea, and it's well-intentioned, I think, a lot of the time, in order to counter, some people have low self-esteem and they think, oh, I'm not good enough. And so there's this rise of this counter narrative. No, you're good enough. You're perfect just the way you are. Well, you don't have to do a thing. Sorry, there is not a single human being for which that's true. Yeah. Every single one of us needs to work, needs to make sacrifices, needs to go along to get along at times, stand up for ourselves at other times. We all have work to do. And telling women, you can have everything and you're perfect just the way you are, you don't need to change, is setting them up for pure disappointment, and they will blame the man. And some men will accept that blame and die on the inside as they realize, because think about it from a man's point of view, if your value is how happy you can make your woman, and you realize your woman can never be made happy, that means either something is very wrong with her or something is very wrong with you. Yeah. And depending on which way that man goes, he will either destroy and end the relationship, which is actually the healthier option of the two, or he will destroy himself. Yeah. In the belief that he will never be enough.
The frustration with this as well, it's like it's a social contagion, because now women will sabotage other women's relationships because I think it's envy. They're like, no, he's not treating you right. You deserve more, boo. You deserve more. You're a queen. You should be treated like a queen. And it's like, this is the thing. Like, everyone wants to have the Lamborghini, the designer shit, and be flashy on Instagram, but none of you actually want to do the required work to get there. And my frustration with this is, and you and I both know this, we're both entrepreneurial. It is hard, and very few people make it. And those who do, amazing, and they deserve this success because it crushes you. It crushes you. I got a little bit close and I ended in a liquidation. It broke my heart. But it's the thing that people don't understand. There is sacrifice for that. So when the man turns around and he's sacrificed everything, what makes you think he's going to settle with you? Yeah, why would he? He's worked his ass off. Why would he want you? What do you bring to the table? Do you know what I mean? But
they want a high value man, but if they ever got one, they wouldn't be able to keep up. They wouldn't actually be able to hold themselves to the same standards that he holds himself to.
I want to tell you a story just on the crazy leftists, because this is a story that I didn't want to tell for a while because I don't want to give them the clout. I'm sure they'll celebrate this, but hopefully we're too far into the podcast for them to listen this far. Anyway, as you guys know, Topher and I have a lot of trolls, and I have a particularly vicious group of women who, it doesn't matter. It's the same thing, right, with Trump. It doesn't matter what I post, what I wear, what I say, how I dress. It's wrong. It's terrible. I'm ugly. I'm gross. All the things, right? I'm a bigot. I'm a Nazi. Yeah. One of these women are so unhinged. Because my partner didn't want his face on my Instagram, and I understand that he's a private person. He's not interested in Instagram fame. I have a big Instagram following.
And look, let's be honest, he's fugly anyway. So no, why would you? For those that are listening to the podcast, I wish you could have seen Carly's face. We've had a couple of good faces out of you this episode, Carly.
Very defensive, my man. So this is the thing, right? Because I made that we made that choice together. We're both like, yeah, no worries, that's fine. And I don't really care. It's one of those things. Instagram's sometimes I post, sometimes I don't. Whatever. Anyway, so I was putting up some funny photos where I just blur out his face or whatever. And one of these bitches, and I'm sorry, she's a bitch. She screenshots the photo and loads it up onto this fucking forum, and then goes, "Oh, he's a Nazi. You can tell from his hairdo. My boyfriend's a Nazi because of his hairdo." Right? That was one of the comments. It gets worse. This is where it takes a sinister turn. It's not all funny. They have made it their mission to figure out who he is and where he works, and they did that. They figured out where I live specifically, and then they decided to send a care package to his work. Do you know what they sent in this care package? This is how deranged left feminist women are. They sent a package to my partner's work And inside it were 2 baby pacifiers and a condom and a really lovely written card basically saying, Carly's just trying to get knocked up to trap you, so you should probably leave now. That's what these leftist, feminist, crazy women do. And that is thanks to fourth wave feminism. Because what woman who is in sound mind, who is happy in herself, goes to the supermarket, buys a pacifier for $16 or whatever, goes and buys a $7 Hallmark card, and then goes to the friggin' post office, pays the $10 postage? What sane, rational person does that?
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
This is psychopathic shit. No wonder they're upholding people like Luigi Mangione. They're just as crazy. But these are the people who are the gatekeepers of virtue. These are the people who we should be believing. Believe all women. Women know everything. More women should be in the workplace. Those kind of women? I think not. Sorry. Like, it's just outrageous.
Carly, I just wish that you would just stop holding back and just really, really let yourself go sometime. Really tell us what you really think, you know? No, that is insane. That is properly that is the point, and I'm not someone who says this lightly, but that is the point at which you have to start asking, do you need therapy? Do we need to put you in an institution? Because that is not normal levels of fucked up.
It's not, but you just need to go to this forum and look at the way these women speak. Yeah. You know, these people are disturbed. It's cruel. It's nasty, and they'll defend themselves. But the reason I bring this up, like, I don't give a shit what they say about me. I really don't, and I can't stop it anyway. And I've never looked at it, you know. But you know, you start crossing the line. That's almost criminal. That's like stalkish, right?
That's getting towards AVO type territory. Yeah.
So obviously, it's all done anonymously. And so I gave it to the police. I've documented it. It's all there. And like, tell you what, the next time you do something cute, I'm going to find out and I'll make sure it destroys your life, because give it time. These people always make a mistake. They always slip up. They get too confident.
And look, it's if they've walked into a post office, they'd be on video, they'd be on camera, all that stuff. Like you could track them down so easily now.
Very quickly. But my point is like, these women, like, I have empathy to a degree. You know, when you're young, you're impressionable, right? But as you grow up and start to have life experience, you start to realize the world maybe not exactly as you were told. And you start to realize that, you know, maybe there's a little bit more nuance to things. If you still believe that feminism is the right way and it hasn't had a horrible, horrible impact on us, then I pity you. I really do. And that's not to say I want to be a 50s housewife either. Yeah. There's an in-between here. It's a contribution. Everyone should be contributing together. It should be about, hey, how do we collectively build ourselves up? And that's used to be how it was. Not anymore. Now it's seen as like, oh, you're a trad wife.
If you want to get your mind blown about what femininity can be, don't go back to the 1950s. Go back 3,000 years and have a read of what King Solomon wrote about the ideal housewife in Proverbs 31. Because what he talks about is not what people say. People who hate on Christians are like, oh, Christian, you just want your woman barefoot, pregnant in the kitchen. Well, this woman runs her own business, has her own employees, imports and exports. It says she considers a field and buys it. So in other words, she's not going to her husband for approval of her decisions. She's the one who goes, do I want to buy that patch of land or not? And then based on her decision, she does it or she doesn't. Talks about her, having other people that work for her, including males that work for her, how she has her own profit. She runs a business, she buys, she sells, and she makes her own money. She's financially independent. The only thing it says about her husband is 2 things. Number one, that he loves her dearly because it says he rises up and calls her blessed. In other words, like, she's an impressive woman and he's like, I'm so glad I've got you, right? And the only other thing it says is that her husband sits in the gate, which is a cultural reference for being one of the lawmakers or someone of cultural and political or legal significance. They're an influential person. But this woman is not made off the coattails of her husband. She's made off her own hard work, and she has ownership rights, legal rights to be able to own property, buy and sell, trade internationally, employ people, all of that stuff. That's the 3,000-year-old version of a virtuous woman, of a virtuous wife. And I think that's a much better one than the 1950s one. Yeah,
I would agree. And this is the thing, I'm critical of feminism, but I'm not, then I get called a trad wife. I'm like, is that all there is to you? Those extremes, there's nothing in between?
Yeah.
Because like you're able to be independent, but you still want to be a part of a partnership where you collectively work together. I don't think that's a bad thing, you know?
Yeah.
But
and sharing goals and sharing ambitions.
And I think these days you need it too. Like, you know, like we always talk about what it was like for the boomers growing up, right? Like they could raise a family off one salary and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, nowadays you can't. You need a partner in this life. You really do. It's like, you know, I was single for a really long time. I know what singles tax is. And now having a partner, it's just nice to be able to like collectively work together and like we're a team. You know, and it's really refreshing. It's really nice. And it's like, you know what? He comes home from work one night, I'll cook dinner. I come home from work late one night, he cooks dinner. You know, we both clean the house together. We both work together. You know, I think that's exactly where we should be, but that's demonized because women want to be waited on hand and foot. And that's not their fault. That's what they're told. That's what they're told in movies. It's what they're told by all these like people in the media. And like, I'm not going to say someone who is, you and I both know, but there's people like that who have amassed a massive audience that are particularly vicious and volatile on social media. And somehow they're co-opting these young minds to make them not only hate men, but also hate themselves.
Yeah.
And like,
Andrew Tate has his female equivalents. This is the thing. The amount of hate that is directed at Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan, I think a decent amount of it probably is justified. I'm no fan of a lot of what they appear to have gotten up to in the past. But where's the hate directed at the female equivalent? The misandrist women out there who are hating on men and are destroying lives and are, in my opinion, advocating criminal behavior. There are people out there openly advocating for women to lie about the men they've had relationships with or that they've married in order to get better outcomes in court. Like that is criminal, and yet it's acceptable culturally and legally, it would appear, because they're not being prosecuted, to be out there publicly advocating for women to lie to the courts, just as long as the person you're hurting is a man.
Well, this is some intrigue for you. So this is more from Candace Owens. She has opened up the Harvey Weinstein files because he's been retried soon. And you know, the whole Me Too movement, right?
Yes.
And this is what happened. This is my frustration with the Me Too movement, because anything that becomes like this, like global contagion, I'm immediately skeptical about. And I was skeptical about Me Too for a lot of reasons, because there are genuine victims, right? There are heinous crimes committed against women by men. We know that. Domestic violence is very real. But if anything can be tried as some kind of like crime, then that diminishes the real victims. And it means that when one woman like does the Amber Heard, lies, and then it goes all the way to court and it becomes out that she lies, she tarnishes the reputation of the real victims who are just trying to get justice, right?
And makes it way harder for them.
Rosie Betty, the woman, she won Australian of the Year, and her husband murdered their son. Am I getting that right? This is a while ago now. Rosie Betty, she's a victim of domestic violence.
Okay.
Someone like that, right, who's become an advocate for it, who talks up about it, that's a genuine victim. And what happened to her was horrendous, right? Having her child murdered by her husband. But then you have your Amber Heards. And then this Harvey Weinstein thing. Now, I'm not saying Harvey's not a monster. I'm sure in someone in a position of power like that, I'm sure he overplayed his hand. But I also don't know. I wasn't there in the lawsuit, whatever. My concern is how many of those women went into the courtroom accusing Harvey Weinstein that weren't actually victims? And then he gets and this is the issue, right? If Harvey is actually a predator, but he gets convicted on false crimes, guess what? He walks. He walks free. Double jeopardy, man. You can't try him again. And so this is what women don't understand. They go, he must go to jail at all costs. It doesn't matter if you lie. It does matter, because the judicial process means that on appeal, all of that gets re-examined once the limelight's gone and all the hysteria goes. And they go, hang on a minute. There's a lot of inconsistencies in this testimony. This looks like perjury. Oh, my God, guess what? Overturned. Now, I'm going to go into this case just very quickly because there's a couple of things here. Harvey Weinstein was only jailed on the testimony of 2 women, right? There was like 60 women who said that he assaulted them. He only got a conviction because of 2 particular women. And one of those women, Miriam, her name is, she testified that he raped her twice, right? But the problem is, when she's on the stand and she's talking to Harvey's lawyer, She says something about his testicles. Now, why does this matter? It matters because Harvey Weinstein doesn't have testicles. He had a surgery in 1999 where some kind of like gangrene that he had. And so his testes got moved into his upper thigh. And so he doesn't actually have a scrotum like normal men. But when you have a woman testifying that he did something with his testicles, knowing full well that he doesn't have them, looks a lot like a lie, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The problem. And so this is my anger with women. Harvey may be a predator. He may be. But when you have someone like that up there who makes a mockery of the justice system just to try and get that guilty verdict, it is likely that it will be, what do they call it? Like
mistrial.
Mistrial.
Yeah.
Oh, not because he's in jail, but what do they call it when it's like overturned?
Yes, I know what you mean. I'm still just recovering from, I did not have on my bingo card for today discussing Harvey Weinstein's testicles with Carly. That wasn't on my list of things to do when I got up this morning. But I will say what you're talking about is a well-known problem. It's a thing called virtuous corruption. And it's a massive problem in the legal system. It's a massive problem actually in the environmental movement as well, where people become so convinced that a certain thing is true. And in some cases it is. Like if you were a woman who got actually abused and raped and what have you by Harvey Weinstein, you know that he's a monster, right? You know that for a fact. But if you don't have the evidence, then there is overwhelming pressure on you by the prosecutors and everyone around you to come up with the smoking gun, to come up with the thing that's going to put him away forever for all the right reasons. And let's take a situation like that. Let's assume that he is guilty, and let's assume that this individual knows that he is, but also knows that the evidence she has isn't necessarily going to be good enough. There is enormous pressure and understandable pressure to say, well, just fudge it a little bit, just overemphasize it a little bit. And coming away from the criminal legal system, the same thing happens in environmentalism. People become convinced that the end of the world is nigh due to carbon dioxide, but they haven't got the smoking gun. So what's the temptation? Well, from a financial point of view, in terms of getting research grants and everything else, getting media attention, but also just from an ideological point of view, if you really believe the end of the world is nigh, why not just fudge it a little bit? Why not just overemphasize? Al Gore admitted that he did this, talking about the fact that, if we told them that the end of the world is 200 years away, they wouldn't panic. We need them to panic. So we have to tell them that it's 10 years away. And then we get situations like this where potentially someone who I have my own reasons just due to contacts within the industry to be fully convinced that he's an awful, awful human being who did some truly horrible things to women. And that's, I say that as an opinion, but it's what I believe to be a well-informed opinion because I've spoken to people that had in-person dealings with him. So I would love to see him in jail and stay there. But unfortunately, when you give in to virtuous corruption, even for the most noble of reasons, you set up a situation where a monster might walk.
Yeah, and that's what infuriates me. And that's exactly what happens with a lot of women today. Believe all women. Well, no, most women bullshit. This is infuriating to me. Believe the women who are brave enough to go out there and to, put it all on the table. But yeah, and so now, that's only the first installment of Candace Owens' thing. I'm sure there'll be more. And I agree with you. I think he is a monster. There's something about him I don't like. And I know what men like that are like when they're in those perceived positions of power that they can't ever lose.
He's the gatekeeper. He's the gatekeeper to every young, pretty woman's dreams. And it's my understanding that he made the most of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but then there's also a level of regrettability that women then like to use against men. So, and I've seen this before. I think I've told you this story. This is a long time ago, but I have a friend who was accused of rape and by his ex-partner, and it went to trial. And the trial, she didn't win. It got what's the word I'm looking for when the trials? I want to say annulled. That's not the word I'm looking for. Dismissed. Yeah. Sorry. And so, but the problem is, she accused him of a rapist. Then all of a sudden it was in the papers and he's now known as a rapist. The outcome is irrelevant and it ruined his life. This person is somewhat well known and had a very big career ahead of them. But because of that allegation that was false, fundamentally false, and it was done out of just being a jilted girlfriend, it cost him his life. Yeah. And he's living the life sentence because people think he's a rapist and he's not. But again, with the truth, and I mean, this happened to me. Oh, she's accused of this. And then that's all people wanted to hear. What happens next is irrelevant to people,
I think we're moving past that world, though. I feel for anyone that went through that in the last 20 years, because certainly I'd say about 10 years ago was the height of all of that madness. The Believe All Women, the I'll Ride With You. You remember this whole social movement was born out of one scribbler for a newspaper on the transit system, wherever it was, whichever country it was, looking at someone wearing a hijab and adjusting it and seeming uncomfortable. And the rest was an imagination in that person's mind of them imagining why that person might have felt uncomfortable and assuming it to be because of the racism and misogyny and Islamophobia and everything else, and saying, I'll ride with you, and then virtue signaling all of that into a column that went viral. And this movement was born entirely out of her imagination. Yeah. And the social condemnation on all men, on all white men, on anyone who could be labeled tarred with good reason or not as some Islamophobic whatever, was implicated in this imagining of this one individual. It's phenomenal. So I have enormous sympathy. I have enormous sympathy for anyone who went through that in the last 20 years. But I think we're emerging out of that season, and there is
exhausting.
Sorry.
It's exhausting. You can't. It's unsustainable. Are you familiar with the term main character?
Yeah. Well, main character syndrome. Yes.
Yeah. So So this is the thing, right? Main character syndrome. People who were never meant to be main characters are trying to manufacture it, right? Yeah. And I don't say that to be cruel, because not everyone can be a billionaire, not everyone can be a top level politician, or unfortunately, most of us are just general people, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Correct.
But now what you say, and this is social media's fault, and I'll lay this at the hand of social media. Now we have ability to manufacture outrage, manufacture ridiculous situations. And like I said, it can go viral before the truth comes out. And we've seen a lot of that. It's like, someone will just land on the scene like, oh my God, I'm so amazing. Look at me. And then literally a week later, everyone's like, this person's an idiot. They have this meteoric rise to fame. And that comes out of this desperation to break free from, the group, right? Everyone wants to be the main character. Yeah. And what happens here is now the self is the God. We've walked away from God. Now it's like the self. It's narcissism. And you'll enjoy this as a Christian, but I really do think, this is taking us towards nihilism. And I think we're past it now. We're at the point where the self and the self-obsession and narcissism, that is their God. And that is why we're seeing people who are openly calling for assassinations and upholding, cheering on Luigi Mangione, because the self is more important than the general collective good.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting thing, this main character syndrome. I would argue that it is healthy for every individual to have themselves as the main character of their own life. I would argue that's a healthy thing. We see people that actually put themselves down so far that they're not even the main character of their own life, and they make themselves completely subservient to the whims and the wills of other people around them. And then they never live up to their potential. They never contribute. They never leave a mark that they could have left. Because they weren't willing to step into the role of being the main character of their own life. But what becomes really dangerous is when people think that they are the main character of other people's lives.
Yes.
And to bring it full circle, I would say that that's exactly what happened with Volodymyr Zelensky, right? When all of a sudden he's the president of a country that is the central conflict between the world's great superpowers, suddenly he thinks, not only am I the main character within my own life, I'm the main character of the world right now. And he came to believe his own kind of mythos that he built around himself. And that's an example of what can happen. And again, tying lots of threads together, feminism says to the women, you are the main character in your relationship.
Yeah.
Right? That's an incredibly dangerous position. Now, I don't think a man should say that he's the main character in a relationship either. It's healthy for the woman to say, I'm the main character within my life, and the man to say, I'm the main character within my life. I'm talking heteronormative relationships here, sue me. But not to say I'm the main character of the relationship. The relationship is something bigger than either of them, right? And it requires both of them to come in without this ambition of being the main character. So there is a place for that ego. There is a place to say, no, I'm here. I'm me. I'm allowed to have gravity. I'm allowed to leave a mark. I'm allowed to be the main character within my own life. But you're not allowed to become the main character of mine, and I'm not allowed to become the main character of yours.
Just something that I thought was worth throwing in there as well. Like, I think a lot of people are incentivized for the wrong reasons to pursue relationships now. It used to be about, like, you know, like I'm talking, you know, 500 years ago, it was about finding a woman to basically give you an heir, right? Or, you know, you had as many children as possible, knowing full well that half of them won't make it past 5. Whereas as, you know, humans became more stable, we had better living conditions and whatever, it then became about the family, the nuclear family, and these family units. And it was very much like collectivism. Like, you know, we were at the village. You didn't often see things outside your local village. And then, you know, everyone was sort of like helping each other. And now all of a sudden it's been diminished down to the point where it's just self. Me, I. That's all it is. And the number one thing, having been someone who was single for such a long time and, you know, now very happily in love, the thing that, like, took me by the biggest surprise, don't get me wrong, like, there's lots of things I could, like, talk about Gareth with, it's his kindness. And this is the thing. When a man feels like he's in a position to be kind, he doesn't have to be, like, you know, defensive or on guard and, like, you know, waiting for, like, oh, what am I walking into tonight? When a man can actually be kind, it becomes like that's where the real vulnerability and the relationship starts to blossom, because there's a level of intimacy that happens, and I don't mean sexual, I mean just between mutual respect for each other. And if you can't allow a man to be kind, then you're never going to have something to build. And that's the thing that just, like, blows my mind. Like, you know, I talked before about women having icks. They'll list, you know, he's got to be this height and he can't be into this, but he's got to be into that. He's got to wear this, but he can't wear that. Great, all good. But what about, like, the virtues that he has? Like, and I have to be honest, I think kind should be at the top of your list.
Yeah. So for me, the ultimate definition of masculinity is strength in service. That for me is the ultimate definition of masculinity. A man is, by definition, almost all of the time going to be physically stronger than anyone else in his household. There would be a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, physically stronger than anyone else in his household, among the physically stronger people within his community, and is expected, as a consequence of that, to be a load bearer, to carry the load of providing for the family, of anticipating problems and threats to the family and being the one that deals with those. And that is a beautiful thing. Strength in service. Men have a superior physical strength, and to put that then into service towards the people that are given into their care. Where it goes really wrong, and I've talked about Tate before on this, his definition of masculinity is all about egocentrism and consumption. It's how much can I consume? How much can I make this about me? And even when he talks about, oh, I'm always working so that other people around me can have fun, blah, blah, blah. There's this incredibly egocentric nature, foundation that underpins all of that. It's like, look at me and how hard I'm working for you all. Well, actually, strength in service says I'm going to work hard when it's time to work, and then I'm going to become fully present and fully available to the people that I love when it's time for us to relax and to connect and that actually becomes the service. So there is a healthy masculinity, and it's strength in service. But can I finish on this? And then we do have to move on because there are other topics that we do need to talk about. Can I give you the trademarked Topher field theory of how to make a man happy?
Please do.
It's just 3 things. It's very simple. And if you just give your man these 3 things in just a small dose of each of these 3 things every single day, watch him blossom, watch him bloom. And guys that you think are narcissists or assholes or grumpy all the time or blah, 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 watch them bloom. It's 3 things. And my acronym is ASS. Every man needs a little bit of ASS. It's not ASS, it's AAS. It is admiration, appreciation, and stimulation. Okay? Admiration. Let him know that you think he's fantastic for some reason. It could be a little thing that he did. It could be, it could be something that he does. It could be his work. It could just be recognizing that he did a nice thing for you. Thank you for taking the shopping in from the boot of the car. Something that is more than, that's more an appreciation thing, an admiration thing. I love that as soon as you get up in the morning, every single morning, you're making breakfast for me. I think that's just like the way you serve me like that is amazing. Some sort of admiration. Find a reason to do that every single day. Appreciation. Find a reason to do that every single day. And then stimulation. And sex is a massive thing in any intimate relationship. Sex is a massive thing for guys. And ladies, if it's not a massive thing for you, don't make the assumption that you can just kill his sex life, right? Don't be the reason why he has no sex or has a limited sex life, right? But stimulation doesn't have to be sex every day. Ladies, if you want to get a couple of freebie days where you don't have to have sex, all right, send him a text message on day one saying, man, I can't wait for tomorrow night. I'm going to be pulling out something special, right? Now, he's good for today. He'll be waiting for tomorrow, right? Then tomorrow, you give him what he wants. Then the day after that, you send him a text going, man, I'm still thinking about last night. That was incredible, right? Yeah. And you've bought yourself multiple days off one thing. But my point is everyday stimulation. Every day you're telling him that you're thinking about him in that way. You give him those three things every day, something, it doesn't have to be big, it can be a small thing of admiration, a small thing of appreciation, and a small thing of stimulation, and watch him blossom.
Yeah. I don't think relationships are that complicated. I really they take work. And I think people are offended by that, but it's a reciprocal relationship, and it's like, I've seen this from my friends. I know if my friends do it, like, I'm not going to do that because I want him to give in to me. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. So you want 100% your way. That's not how this works. Like, there's got to be concessions, pursue things that is their interest. I can't tell you how many SpaceX videos I've watched on YouTube, thanks to G. I'm now I'm very aware. And you know what's funny is all of a sudden you realize, hey, actually I'm a bit interested in this too now. A shared interest, but that's an ick. Ew.
No. The minute someone starts talking about red flags and icks, no. I mean, I'm married anyway, so it's not relevant, but you just go, no, sorry, you're not ready. You're not ready to actually have a serious relationship.
It really is. And there's I find it very juvenile. But speaking of red flags, let's transition out, right? Because we could talk about this all day.
Ooh,
Hey, trans.
You're trans, yeah.
I'm trans. Can you imagine? One day I just turn around and go, you know what, guys? I've figured it all out.
I'm one of you now.
I'm one of you. Can you imagine?
I think G would be as surprised as anybody.
He's got nothing to worry about. But so Mardi Gras was over the weekend. Now, I have no issue with Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is an institution that's happened in Sydney for a very long time. What I do have an issue with, and I have plenty of gay friends, and I'm supportive of them. I support gay marriage, all the things. I just don't need it shoved down my throat. I don't need to go to the supermarket and have the pride flag shoved in my face. I don't need to sit there and worship the god of homosexuality or queerness or trans or
which is Ishtar, by the way. There is a specific ancient Canaanite god, Ishtar, also known as Venus, also known as Aphrodite in different religions. But there is very much a spirit that is involved in all of that.
I don't know, when did it become commonplace to discuss your intimate lives so openly and so outwardly?
Yeah, well, this is the double standard that people who LGBTQ plus what have you, they say, oh well, I'm just being me. You get to be you. Well, I'm not trying to parade my sexuality in front of kids at the story hour, right? Now, to be fair, neither are most gay people, and I think one of the things that probably doesn't get enough acknowledgement is the very clear distinction between gay people and transgender. The trans movement has pissed off the gay movement tremendously, because in some senses it actually seeks to erase same-sex attraction, saying there isn't really and in Canada we saw this. There was a real kind of coming to blows over there. A little bit of history now, but a recognition that, hey, we are not the same. We're not actually a part of the same movement. And they love to, certain people, activists love to sort of say, oh, well, you shouldn't be so obsessed with their sexuality. Like, why does it bother you that drag queens are reading? They're just people. It's like, well, because they lead front and center with their sexualized identity in front of kids, right? I'm not going to let a bloke wearing a trench coat and nothing on his lower half read story hour to kids either. Right? I don't care if he identifies as straight or as a pan-dimensional shade of the color blue, right? That person should not be being given access to kids like that. And I'm sorry, if you want to read to kids, dress like an everyday Joe Blow and present yourself like an everyday Joe Blow. If you want to present yourself as a woman and you can do that authentically, okay, fine. But if you want to be there with that sexualized identity and leading with that, then I'm sorry, that has no place with kids. And if they hadn't come after the kids, a lot more people would not have an issue.
Yeah.
But they did, and we do.
One of my close friends is a guy who's gay, and he's been with his partner for, gosh, they've been together so long now. I want to like say 13, 14 years.
Right.
They hate the trans community. These are guys who, you know, had to go through the whole coming out and telling everyone. It was hard. There was definitely a time where being gay was really unacceptable and it was really challenging. And they are those gays. And now it's like, oh, they're not gay enough. You know, they're ethnics as well, but like that they're not ticking enough boxes now because they're not trans or they're not queer, they're not, you know, and their whole thing is like, we fought for these rights. We wanted the ones coming up under us to have a much easier life. And now what they're doing is actually jeopardizing what we worked for, which is now the gays and the lesbians and are all being tarred with the same brush. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is what the trans community has done to the gays and the lesbians. And I see a lot of this shit because I follow it all on X. But so now with the trans issue, I never know which one's which, so I'm going to just say it in simple terms. A man who becomes a woman, that's a trans woman. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So a trans woman will accuse a lesbian, try and follow with you guys, of being transphobic because the lesbian doesn't want to have an intimate relationship with the trans woman. The lesbian is a lesbian because she likes other women, but the trans woman is now a woman, therefore the lesbian should be attracted to her. So now what you're seeing is like there's actually fractures in that community because the gays aren't gay or lesbian enough to accept the trans people.
So this is also sort of proof that the slippery slope argument does actually matter. Because when the whole gay marriage debate was coming up, people like myself, my position on that was that the government shouldn't have a definition of marriage. That was my position on that. To get the government, I'm a libertarian, get the government out of marriage altogether. It's a cultural institution that existed before government existed, and it has no role in defining it. But I lost that argument. It's, you know, the government has a definition of marriage now, ever since the Marriage Act and ever since John Howard, it was made, the definition was between a man and a woman. And I remember lots of Christians and lots of churches celebrating that they'd won the marriage debate. And I just sat there and went, nope, all we've done is put marriage into the hands of government and said, oh, government, you have jurisdiction over this now. And sure enough, fast forward 20 odd years and the definition got changed. So during all of that debate, one of the arguments that got shot down every time was that this would lead to pedophilia, it would lead to polyamory, it would lead to an opening of the door to a lot of other philosophies sexually. And of course that was shot down. Oh, that's the slippery slope argument. You can't be seriously trying to make the slippery slope argument. Well, yeah, because it's real. And it's not that the same people that are pushing for gay marriage are then going to push for polyamory or pedophilia or these sorts of things. But the people that want that are going to try and ride the coattails of the success. So I'm not accusing, you, the gay marriage activist, as wanting pedophilia. I'm saying that there's someone lined up behind you. They're staying really small and out of sight. And as soon as you get as far as you're going to go and you go, okay, I'm going to stop here, they're going to pop out from behind you and go, okay, we're going to keep on going, right? Yeah. And smooth segue coming up right here for a subject change. Are you ready for this? Speaking of the slippery slope argument, have you seen that they're trying to introduce 30-kilometre-an-hour speed limits in Victoria?
I have. And am I shocked? No. They did a trial in Fitzroy and Collingwood where they were trialing 30 kilometres an hour where the tram lines are. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, it's just a trial. And the local residents were understandably really angry. And a trial never means a trial, guys. A trial means we're rolling this out. We're just like trying to take the shock from you.
We're boiling the frog. So 2001 is when suburban streets went from 60 kilometres an hour to 50. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a political commentator yet. I didn't start until 2009. But in 2001, I was saying amongst my friendship groups, I was 19, I had my Ps. I was saying amongst my friendship groups, mark my words, they're going to go to 40 and then they're going to go to 30. And I got laughed at. It's like, no, they're not. No one's talking about that. They're just going to 50. It's a sensible reform. These are suburban streets with cars parked on the side. There are kids playing. If someone's chasing a ball, all that stuff, right? And sure enough, then we went to 40 with the school zones. Now they're talking 30. And I think it's valid to say, well, why don't we just go to 0? Why don't we just go to 10 kilometres an hour? And people go, oh, that's just rolling. Sorry?
I said just stand beside your car as it's rolling down the driveway.
Well,
Can I tell you a story about speed police?
Sure.
So neighbours, right? I used to live in a unit block and there's 15 units and we had a shared driveway and the driveway, I mean, I'm terrible with estimations, but I'm going to say it was like 100 metres long, Does that sound right? Anyway, it was long enough.
It would be a very long driveway.
It was long, 15 units, right? So I was the very back unit, so I had to drive the furthest to get there. Now, it had a sign, 5 kilometers an hour. Now, it's one of those things I was like, yep, whatever. I'm not doing 5K. It wasn't a conscious thought. I didn't go, oh, I'm not doing it. I'm like, I will drive at a respectable, safe pace.
Keep your eyes up. Make sure you're seeing.
Now, I would drive up and down the driveway, and everything was fine until all of a sudden it was when the Teals started campaigning. I get this knock at my door. This is a good story, I promise. This guy knocks at my door, and it's like this silver-haired gentleman boomer who's wearing a Zoe Daniels T-shirt and tries to talk to me about the Teals. And I said, hey, I don't appreciate political solicitation at my front door. I hope you have a great night, but, like, this isn't the place. And then he was like, oh, well, why don't you want to talk about it? And I was like, because right now I'm having a cup of tea and I don't want to. Is that okay? Anyway, turns out that was the chairman of our body corporate, unbeknownst to me, right? Yes. And so from that day, I was public enemy number 1. Now, I drive, can you believe it, a big, murderous blue Jeep Wrangler. But coincidentally,
I just heard Greta Thunberg cry.
Correct. Scary. Big, meaty, like all trains on it as well. 2-inch lift kit. Like it's terrifying. Anyway, across the way, so I'm at the back on one unit, and across the way there is another young girl who also has a Jeep, but she has the sport version and it's black, and so she doesn't have the big all terrains on it. Anyway. Hers, not murderous. Mine, the big blue one, murderous. So I would drive and, like, I would literally just roll the car, just like, go nice and slow. Like, I'm not trying to piss anyone off. And all of a sudden, the war began that I was speeding up and down the driveway. Now, I was accused of going 40 kilometers up the driveway. I'm like, hang on a minute. By the time I've turned in, got up to speed, I'd be driving into that unit there. Like, it's not... Like physics exists. Yeah. Anyway,
I mean, Jeeps are notoriously slow vehicles. I mean, it'd take you at least a kilometre to get up to 40 k's an hour.
I'm going to let that one slide because the story's good.
See, you have to. That's the thing. I've got you pinned. You have to leave it alone.
Well, this is the thing, right? So I'm driving up and down this driveway, and this is an ongoing war. So I'm getting like letters in the mailbox. You're speeding. Now, unbeknownst to my dear neighbours, I have CCTV. I have footage all around the property. And I'm like, you are accusing me of something I am blatantly not doing. And so it got to a point where I actually got stills. And I was like, if this is the case, I would be doing this, this, and this, and this. And then I went back to high school physics. I gave them equations. I'm like, it's physically impossible to be doing what you're accusing me of. And I was like, also, my car doesn't even idle at 5Ks. Like, it's going to roll at about 9. Because it's just physics, man. Like, this is how it works. Anyway, and then it turned into this whole spat. And I was like, right, I'll put a dash cam in my car and I will record everything. And so I just became one of those, like, I had a spreadsheet. I'm not even joking. Because if you're going to accuse me of things, I'm going to start collecting evidence. Anyway.
Sure.
And so then, as neighbors do, they forget they're accusing you of something and then they go do the thing that they're accusing you of. And so on my footage, I caught maybe like 4 or 5 of them speeding. And so when they came around again, they were like, hey, you're speeding. I was like, who's alleging this? Where is their claim? Where is their evidence? And it's like, oh, well, everyone's saying it. I'm like, who's everyone? Because I'm saying I'm not. So if someone's making the accusation, anyway. So I point out, I'm like, that car speeds, here's the evidence. And then, of course, anyway, the point is, they went through so much bureaucracy to try and install this 5-kilometer speed limit that I ended up taking them out to VCAT and we had a war over it. And I won because the judge is like, that's impossible. It's not fair. You are scapegoating her. This seems politically charged. She's fine and she can continue.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying about these speed limits. It's just there to try and, I think a lot of it's revenue. It's got nothing to do with safety. It's just someone going, oh, they're speeding. They're going too fast.
I think it's deeper than revenue. I think we're at the point now where the people that get these positions of power enjoy that power so much that they are thinking of new ways to observe their power at work. If you can force somebody to do something absurd, something that is patently against their self-interest, makes it take longer for them to get anywhere, has no meaningful, tangible improvement in safety, as long as people are paying attention to the road and driving according to the conditions, the difference between 40 and 30 is meaningless. So, but if you can get them to obey you regardless, it becomes that 1984 thing. It's not about the action. It's about the fact that the action is in compliance.
It's the submission.
Mm.
And you see that a lot, though. And this is something that really deeply disturbs me as Australians. We've talked about this a lot, but Australians are so compliant because they don't know any better. Like, you know, oh, well, if the government says so, it must be right. Like, why would the government ever be wrong? But I think we're starting to see resistance to that now because common sense is not, like most people, like as we opened with, people are now seeing things with their eyes. And they're going, hang on a minute, this doesn't make sense. We know that in Victoria alone, like our biggest generator is fines. Like that's a lot of the revenue for the state government. It's just fine. So you and I can get fines for God knows what, like, you know, 3Ks over, you know, over an hour in a parking spot. You get a fine for everything. Young kids running around with a machete, totally fine.
They got off free. So there's a issue here with bureaucrats setting impossible targets for themselves. The most wonderful thing you can do as a bureaucrat is to set an unachievable target. And let's take a zero road toll as a target. No one's going to die on our roads. Well, it's such a virtuous position. Anyone who says, well, no, that's ridiculous. You go, well, how many people do you want to die on our roads? Thank you very much. So it's this wonderfully defensible, virtuous position. No one can tell you you're wrong. So now that you've got everyone's agreed, because you attack anyone that doesn't, that we should have zero road toll. Because it's basically impossible to accomplish, you will never meet that target. But because we've all agreed that the target is correct, well then, I need more budget. I need more resources. I need more power. We need a bunch more petty rules. And there is no end to that journey. You can now map out your entire career of ever more power and budget and employees and people under you as you pursue this completely unachievable, completely impossible goal. But where it gets really perverse, so that's about their own selfish self-interest, but where it gets really perverse is that in the pursuit of an impossible goal, you end up doing way more harm than good. And I made this argument this morning on my socials. We all accept innately in our being, we accept increased risk for improved quality of life. We accept the risk of being killed in a car crash in order to be able to drive places because we can get there faster than if we walk. Or we can carry more things with us than if we were to go by some other means. We accept this trade-off all of the time. We play sports. If you play any kind of a physical sport, you have a risk of getting injured. You accept that risk for the benefit of feeling good and competing and having some fun with friends. So trade-offs are a fundamental part of life. The problem is when you slow down transport, right? We could say, right, we're going to get all trucks off the road. There can be no more trucks because in a truck collision, people die. Okay, getting rid of all buses, getting rid of all trucks, all heavy vehicles. Only cars under 2 ton are allowed to be used and they can only travel at 10 kilometers an hour. Okay, fantastic. Your road toll drops to almost zero. I guarantee you someone will still figure out how to get killed on the road, but it drops to almost zero. Fantastic. That number has been almost accomplished. The problem is all of a sudden the overall death toll goes up. The overall mortality in Australia goes up. Why? Well, because now transporting things has become phenomenally expensive, which means the price of things becomes phenomenally higher, which means quality of life drops. And we have global metrics on this. If you reduce quality of life, you reduce life expectancy. People die of treatable conditions that they didn't have the money to get treated or tested for. People die because of unfortunate accidents because they took more risks in order to earn more money because their living conditions were so difficult. People change their behavior according to the lowered standard of living, and more people will die. So not only do we have a perverse incentive for the bureaucrats who are going to profit and build their career and feather their nest off this impossible target, but we also have the perverse outcomes in other areas of life where they're actually making things worse and not better. And that's exactly what happens with stuff like this 30k an hour speed limit.
Do you know all I can think of? Like, I think of like one of those big hydraulic presses, right? Like you put something under the hydraulic press and you try and push it there. You're not crushing it. That still exists. It just has to expand in other ways. And that's exactly what it's doing. I'm like, you're like, oh, I'm going to pursue this at all costs. And therefore it just creates destruction to the sides of it. But Victoria did that during COVID. Daniel Andrews, donut days, try and get to 0 days. And what did he do? He caused the suicide. He caused like irreparable damage to young people. He caused isolation. He caused people who had cancers to go untreated. Like
financial devastation. Yep.
You know, and I hate always bringing up COVID because I know we've got to get over it. But at the same time, I'm like, if you don't heed the warnings from that time, man, I can't help you. If you don't see it now, I can't help you.
The time to get over it hasn't come yet because we haven't seen anything resembling justice and we haven't seen anything resembling the right lessons being learned. There will come a time to get over it, but that time will come once the lessons have been learned. Now, we don't have this in the show notes, but I think it's actually really significant on exactly that topic. Elon Musk just retweeted a tweet by somebody whose name escapes me, confirming and essentially giving sort of the administration's stamp of approval.
It's the USAID.
Confirming the fact that Fauci's gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab and specifically the COVID-19 virus was developed using USAID money that flowed indirectly into that, essentially making the USA liable for the disease, for the deaths, and for all of the fallout. I don't think that's what he intended to do. But Elon Musk, as an advisor to, now he's not a member of the administration, so probably legally it wouldn't stick, but they are they're certainly saying the quiet part out loud. They're admitting what happened, but they're actually walking dangerously closely from their perspective to rendering the US government liable by their own admission.
I was just trying to find it, and Elon tweets so prolifically, I can't find it in a scroll. But
I'll have a look on, there's this other guy called Topher Field on X, and if you look on his X, he retweeted it much more recently. So should be able to find it that way.
But this is I think my frustration, right? Like, you and I know this. How do you get the normies to realize the gravity of those decisions? Like, those of us who were paying attention and have been talking about this, like, great. We're like, oh, great. You're just confirming what we already knew. What about the normies, man? Like, I'm trying to think, like, I'm going to paint a picture of people I know. These are people who were relatively unscathed through COVID. They still were able to have an income. They maybe were inconvenienced by having their kids at home. But for the most part, like, wear your mask, the vaccine, it's all okay. And, they came out the other side and they watched someone like me and they're like, why were you so angry about it? Like, what were you so bothered by? And, like, it doesn't matter how much I explained it or, like, went viral for speaking about it. For those people, they were never going to understand it. And now you see all this coming out, like, just how bad the vaccines were. And, like, people dropping like flies and, it's not that bad. Like, we were doing the right thing. And now all of a sudden you're starting to see, like, it came from the lab and Fauci was doing gain function and it was actually funded by the US, right? Yeah. How do you crack that into the normies' brains? Like, you fell for the psyop, man.
So it'll only happen one person at a time. People only change their minds individually. And we've talked a lot about the fact that it takes a lot longer to change somebody's mind than it takes to fool them in the first place. But actually the bigger thing from my perspective is that many of them won't, and we have to accept that and not waste our time trying to change their minds. So cast your mind back, not that you were there or I was there, to Mao's Great Leap Forward in China. Right, when he really brought terrible communist repression on China that brought about a famine, and they had a shortage of food, and they needed a scapegoat, something to blame it on, and they said that it was the birds. The birds are eating the crops, and so they made it the mission for every single Chinese adult, child, man, woman, old, young, didn't matter, to try and kill all the birds. And of course, what happens then is the birds, which they successfully managed to eradicate a lot of birds. The birds used to eat the grubs and the bugs and the grasshoppers and everything else, and now they weren't there. They ended up with just an explosion in the number of crop-eating bugs, and their situation got even worse. But here's the thing. Fast forward to today, and they're very elderly now, but Chinese people who were children when that was being done, or were children shortly after that, when it was still very much the cultural norm, if you can catch and kill a bird, that's a good thing. They're still trying to catch birds to this day. 80 years later, they're still trying to catch birds to this day because they're still convinced that that was the right thing. There are people who were not even necessarily senior in the Nazi regime, but there were people in the Nazi regime who fled to Argentina and grew old and died as old men, still believing that Hitler was right. And if only Hitler had won the war, things would have been better. Yeah. So I'm sorry, you're not going to get everyone. You're not going to change everyone's mind. And we actually shouldn't waste resources trying.
No, you've lost your sign.
I lost my name. There we go. It's back.
You're back.
I got it back.
And look, this is the thing, right? So my frustration is like, there's moments where you almost black pill yourself on X because you see a lot of the propaganda and just the same talking points coming from the left, like Trump bad, Elon Nazi, like all this kind of stuff. And you just got to, I don't know, like I guess I have a little bit too much faith in people sometimes because I'm like, surely any normal person's going to hear that and go, oh, shut up. Oh, stop it. Like,
maybe not, and they don't need to. We just carry on. It's only ever been a small percentage of people that have changed the world. Roughly 3% of people who are willing to pay a high price for a cause, are all it takes within the population. If you've got 3% of people willing to pay a high price, then around them they'll have about another 10% that are willing to support them, and that's all it takes.
Just trending on Twitter, or X, sorry, is Anthony Albanese. He says he's open to sending Australian troops to serve as peacekeepers in Ukraine in a surprise pre-election statement after the government appeared to reject the idea.
I mean, that's basically following on the coattails of what Keir Starmer said. I don't think it's all that dramatic. I don't think that any peace deal will involve any non-Ukrainian troops inside Ukraine. I think that'll be an absolute red line for Putin. I think the idea that there's going to be some international peacekeeping force, the whole war is predicated around the fact that NATO were continuing to encroach further and further east, and Putin kept saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and they kept doing it, and eventually he invaded. Yes. So the idea that he's going to agree to peace terms that involve essentially NATO troops inside Ukraine as peacekeepers, I think is naive. I think it's a completely moot point. That will never be agreed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Just something I wanted to talk about with the where are we going? Oh, we're talking about Albo, right? Yeah. Albo is now obviously in his election campaign mode, and he went. This is what I wanted to talk about at the Mardi Gras. So he went to the Mardi Gras, as you do, because supportive of all the things, support all the things. And there was an Aboriginal man who was photographed, obviously a queer or gay Aboriginal man, I'm not sure what, wearing thigh-high red boots, stilettos, and looking like he was spearing Jesus Christ. And that photo went viral and has outraged a lot of people, understandably. I'm not what you'd call an active Christian. I grew up in the Catholic Church, as I've said, but, like, I don't practice, right? Like, I have my own theories about things and whatever, but I look at that and go, that is outrageous that in Australia we're allowing that. Yet we can have Senator Payman come out and tell us that women in Iran have better quality of life than Western women, and we're now seeing like all this Muslim apologist stuff. I'm genuinely quite concerned how co-opted people are to believe that the Islam shouldn't be criticized because that's sacred, but we can see Jesus Christ being stabbed by Aboriginal. Like, so, I have skin in the game. That's the point I'm trying to make here.
Yeah, don't lose sleep over it. Payman is not representative of very much or very many people. The Mardi Gras, sorry?
She's Australia's voice, apparently.
Oh, according to herself? Yeah, I mean, I'm Australia's voice, according to me. This is the sort of stuff that people do for attention. This is the sort of stuff, the Mardi Gras, how do you get attention in the Mardi Gras when people happily crawl around on hands and knees wearing dog collars and with their butts exposed and, all that sort of stuff in front of kids? Like, how do you get attention in that context? How do you stand out? Well, you do something like that and you make sure you get photographed with the Prime Minister and all that sort of outrage stuff. I honestly, I am a Christian. I'm a devout Christian. I think blasphemy is a serious thing, and I think that kind of mockery of Christ is a very serious thing. But I don't think it's the sort of thing that I need to be getting all up in arms about. It happens. God is big enough that he can protect his own reputation. God wins in the end. I hope those people discover God and get a relationship with Jesus Christ before they die, and I hope to see them in heaven. If they don't, they're going to discover before it's all said and done that they really kind of screwed that up. It's kind of like, okay, you do you. Like, God gives us the right to rebel against him. It's just that we also experience the consequences of that later on, right? Yeah. He allows us to do it. And it should not surprise any Christian that there are people using the freedom that God has given them to spit in God's face. That's not a surprise. And it shouldn't be a source of outrage. It should be a source of, in my opinion, grief and prayer for those people. I mean, there are people that have done all kinds of awful things to me over the years, and I actively pray for them. I pray for them by name. I include them in my prayers. I want to see them in heaven because I don't deserve the forgiveness that God has given to me. I could argue I'm not as bad as them. That's completely missing the point. Do I measure up to God's perfection? No, of course not by a long shot. Therefore, just like them, I need God's forgiveness. I'm fortunate enough that I've found it, and I hope they do too. because they don't deserve it either, but neither did I. So when we pray the Lord's Prayer, Lord, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Imagine the implication if I go, well, I've found salvation, but I don't want them to. They're too nasty. They're too bad. They're too evil. They're too depraved. No, that's not forgiving others as we've been forgiven. So I would say if you're outraged by that, channel that outrage into grief for the way that people have rebelled against God, and into prayer for their salvation.
How do you feel about, because you're like, this is an interesting one, because obviously I'm right across the youth crime epidemic.
Sure.
There was a wrap-up summary that was sent out where predominantly most of it is migrant crime. Now, I'm not saying it's all migrant crime. Yeah. And I'm very pro, like, cultural diversity. But my issue with this is those people who come in should be vetted. Now, this is obviously an immigration issue, and there's immigration's a contentious issue for a lot of reasons, right? Like, one is the housing crisis, and B is, like the crime. And so understandably now people are going, well, these people need to be deported, or we need to stop migration. You and I are both of the same opinion. The right people should be coming here, so as long as they're vetted and they want to contribute and they realize this is Australia, don't bring your problems from other country with you. But now I fear, and I don't want to be right about this, but I do fear that this getting so bad, and you're seeing this in Europe, right? Like France has been taken over by Africans and Arab immigrants. You're seeing it in Germany, and you're seeing it in Ireland, and now Sweden, and inevitably, and I'm not trying to be racist, I'm just trying to point out the correlation here. There is a massive outbreak of crime because there is a cultural incompatibility, I would call it. I have this fear that it will get so bad that it will then start to do the same thing that's happening with the LGBT community. Like, we don't want any immigrants. All immigrants are bad, right? And I'm seeing that rhetoric starting to explode. And I say to people, it's not all immigrants. That is to be clear. There are great people who genuinely do come here. It's because our government doesn't vet them clearly, and also doesn't deport them if they go out of their way to be destructive. Like a lot of the migrant crime, immediate deportation. Don't put them in our jails. Send them straight back.
So I think the latter is the bigger issue. Vetting is a form of pre-crime. If they're not under sentence in the country where they are, or they are not guilty of something that would have been a crime in Australia, then honestly, let them come. But we have to enforce our laws equally. And ask yourself, what is culture? Culture is essentially what forms as an aggregate of behavior. If we all kind of agree on a set of behaviors as acceptable and unacceptable, a set of behaviors in the form of festivals and holidays and the way that we recognize marriages and family and blah, 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 if we have an aggregate set of behaviors, that becomes our culture. And so when we say to people, you want to come to Australia, you have to adopt our culture, what we're saying is you have to adopt our behaviors. And actually, Australia is an incredibly tolerant country because we will not insist that you adopt our behaviors with regard to holidays and festivals. You don't have to recognize our holidays, and you can recognize your own. We will not insist that you have to accept our behavior around Mount Panorama and Holden versus Ford. We won't require you to put shrimps on the barbie and adopt our food culture. We actually have no requirements on so many areas, but we should have strict requirements on what we define as crime. The moment someone says, well, I'm going to do these things that you define as crime, we say, well, that behavior is not acceptable. And if you insist on doing that behavior, we're going to send you back to where that behavior is considered acceptable. Now, I differ with you slightly. I think we should impose the sentence here in Australia, make them serve their time because they broke the law under our law. And then when their sentence is up, send them back. What's really important here is that we need to put aside our cultural conservatism around underage. If someone is committing adult crimes, then the fact that we're separating them from their family when we send them back to whatever country they came from is not a concern. They want to commit adult crimes, they're going to pay an adult price, they're going to do prison time here in Australia, and then they're going to get sent back to where they came from. If their family wants to, of their own money, buy tickets and fly back with them, they're welcome to do that. They're welcome to leave as well. If they're that worried about the welfare of their child back in the country they came from, they can go and support that child, but that child is never coming back here if they are going to engage in violent crime. So this really comes down to a failure to enforce criminal law. That's literally the entire immigration issue is a failure of law enforcement. We should not be doing pre-crime. We should not be tarring everyone with the same brush, but we should absolutely be dealing with the actual criminals when we figure out who they are, and we know who most of them are.
How do you feel about Albanese taking in Gazans right now?
So I have a great deal of sympathy for anyone who's currently living in a war zone. I have grave concerns about people that have grown up being brainwashed by Hamas to believe that murdering Jews every chance you get is a good thing. The kinds of people that dance in the streets when 9/11 happens, the kinds of people that danced and celebrated very macabrely over the dead bodies of the October 7 hostages that died and celebrated their rape and murder. I have some grave concerns around taking in large numbers of migrants from there. I also question the sense of it, given that we know that Egypt and Syria and other countries in that area refuse to take them. What do they know? What do they know that we ought to know? And I think, unfortunately, the Palestinians have been used as a meat shield against Israel. The reason Egypt and other countries don't want to take them is because they don't want to solve the problem. They want the problem of Gaza and the Palestinian people to continue to be a thorn in the side of Israel. So for me, that's a really tricky one. I'll say this. When I was in my mid to late teens, we had a family living in the apartment blocks behind us. Behazad and Aisha Haziakmedovich and their 2 kids. And they were refugees from the Bosnian situation. I don't remember which side they were on or anything like that. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it back then. And they were lovely. And they were here on temporary protection visas. And then once things stabilized in their country, they went home. And the temporary protection visa allowed them to work while they were over here, but it had no pathway to citizenship. It is a temporary protection visa. You come here temporarily, and then we send you home when the danger is past. Something like that, I'd be willing to contemplate.
Mm-hmm. I have some genuine concerns because I do believe there's incompatibility, basically for the same reasons you said. These are people who are basically brainwashed from birth to hate people. And it's not just like, oh, we don't like them. It's unadulterated hate where murder is the only option. And I just don't believe that's compatible with Australian life. I really don't. And I think my frustration around this, and I don't believe I'm alone in this sentiment, is that we can't have these very fair conversations because of the context of race or racism and any type of discussion around migrant crime therefore paints you as a racist. Yeah. Now, there was footage. I actually thought this was really interesting. Now, obviously, I'm heavily invested in the youth crime things. And I have watched this be covered via the news channels. And prior to that, they always blurred out faces. They never showed you the footage if it was someone of color. If they were a young Caucasian kid, no worries, But all of a sudden, and the reason I bring this up is I think it was just before Christmas or just after Christmas, there was this massive ruckus in Brighton, right? And this really public crash, and then the kids spilled out of the car and it was all happening in front of the cafe there. And so it was all documented on social media. They're all Caucasian kids. So we saw their faces. There wasn't even blurring the kids' faces out, right? That was Christmas. But we know there's been migrant crime. All of a sudden last weekend, a woman, or was the weekend before, a woman was there was an attempted carjacking at a car wash by a very clearly Sudanese man. And he towered over her. She would have been 5 foot something?
Yeah, he was huge. Yeah.
Huge. And he's attacking her, and apparently he had attacked other people prior to that event. For the very first time, the news showed his face, and you could see his Sudanese. Prior to that, they weren't. So something's changing in the culture. Something is, and these are the small nuances that I pay attention to, because all of a sudden it's gotten to a point where you can't sweep this under the rug. Jacinta Allen can't keep saying, "Oh, you're racist." It's well, no, there's a problem here.
There's a serious problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's my concern is these people who we're welcoming to our country, and I agree with you, they should be welcome to come. But if there is an incompatibility there, I don't think it's a racist thing to be able to have that conversation that in the West, we behave like this.
So long as that's done at an individual level, not at a group level. So, and this is why I brought up a couple of weeks ago, I lived in Dandenong. I'm surrounded by Sudanese as well as Maori and other, islanders and Afghans and so forth. And Sudanese are disproportionately overrepresented in crime. That is a fact. But also I saw an enormous number of young Sudanese in school uniform with backpacks on, getting on and off the buses and working in local, their starter part-time jobs, after school jobs and all that stuff, and just getting on with life. And what I don't want to see as a libertarian, I want people to be held accountable for their crimes. And I do not want to see people being held accountable when they haven't committed a crime. So long as what we're doing is saying your behavior as an individual is deemed unacceptable and we're going to deal with you, not, oh, there's too many members of this particular group that are behaving unacceptably, we're now going to deal with the entire group. That's not compatible with libertarian values. That's not compatible, in my opinion, with human rights. But absolutely what we're failing to do and must do is hold the individuals accountable.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because whenever I see this sort of stuff, I'm invested in the youth crime stuff, but this is how stereotypes are born. It's it's like collectivism, right? It could just be a couple of handfuls of people who are bad apples, sure. But that's what happens when you don't do exactly what you just said, where you hold these people accountable. It does tar the whole group. And then it gets to a point where everyone's just like, oh, it's all Africans. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Africa is a very big continent. Like, there's a lot of countries there. So you can't say all Africans. But my frustration with this is like, because out of the sake of virtue and purity, being pure in the liberal progressive sense, these conversations are like taboo. You can't talk about it because you're a racist.
Speaking of conversations that we can't talk about, pretty soon we won't be able to keep talking because we're over the 2-hour mark. So we need to blast through the final topics.
All right. So there were a few others, but like I think for the most part, the Epstein and Ukraine one was the biggest. But do you want to talk about Mardi Sheargold and like the bloody outrage over this?
Oh gosh, can we I actually thought we were done cancelling people for relatively inane comments. You made a great point to me earlier when we were chatting before the show, just about the double standard in this, because what he said was relatively unremarkable as best as I can tell.
Yeah, it was. Again, the clip got taken out of context. Some woman athlete somewhere heard it and she just blasted the last bit of the conversation. Essentially what he was saying is when they're in top form, they're amazing. We all got behind them, but they're now they're nothing burgers and they're falling apart and there's all this infighting. He goes, they're behaving like year 10 girls. And I don't think that's an unfair statement. And then he went on to say, women's sport, I'd rather put a nail through my dick, is what he said.
Yeah.
And to be honest, Marty, I agree with you. I couldn't care less. I want to watch it. I don't dick to nail, but you know what I mean?
Okay, so here's the thing for me. There is this again, disappointment cannot be measured outside of the context of expectation. There is an expectation that people have defaulted to that a women's version of a sport should be every bit as popular and profitable as the men's version. And if it isn't, it's because of misogyny. Now, here's the reality. There are all kinds of sports that no one gives a rat's about. There are all kinds of sports played by men at an elite global level that no one bothers to show up and see the World Series of whatever it might be. Right now, there's lots of weird sports that are supported globally, but there's lots that aren't, and we're allowed to have that opinion. Now, I can just remember back far enough to before the Aussie cricket team got good under Alan Border, and I can just remember the kinds of things that used to get said about the men's cricket team back then. And I tell you what, calling them a couple of year 10 schoolgirls is very, very kind compared to the things I got heard being said by men to other men at backyard barbecues back in the mid 1980s. This is how sports is. You get venerated when you win and you play well, and you get castigated. You get destroyed when you're performing badly. That's the role that you play within society and culture, is to be something that people want to talk about on the weekend. They want to talk about you on the radio. The fact that they're being talked about at all, even to be criticized, is a sign of progress, is a sign that actually they're moving their way up the social pecking order to the point that people actually think that they're worth talking about. If you're a sports player and you can't hack being criticized, even unfairly, then you've no business being in sport.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think, I don't think it was particularly nice, the part where he was like, I'd rather nail my dick. But, that's a figure of speech. It's an expression. And he was saying
it. It's a radio job, for crying out loud. His job is to polarize people and make them either love him or hate him. And either of those options is just as good, because then they tune back in. That's his job.
100%. And, what's his name? Kyle Sandilands. What has he said over the course of his career? He's never been fired. Yeah. And my frustration with this is okay, he said it and you didn't like it. So what? Don't listen. Don't tune in.
Yeah.
I don't know who it was that blew this out of the water, but from what I saw, I think it was like a female athlete. And she, filmed it and put it like live. I'm like, are you a Triple M listener? Like, are any of you people criticizing Mardi Sheargold? Are you Triple M listeners? If you are, then sure, like call into the radio and whatever. But no, it's just
stop listening. If you're an advertiser, withdraw your advertising if you really feel that strongly about it. But let the market speak, not a few outraged individuals. Like that. Why are we giving that much power?
This is just again community policing, because now someone's without a job and without an income, and like. He's going to be hard pressed to find income for a little while, isn't he? Because it's all fresh.
Let's have him on the podcast. Let's make it a 3-person podcast.
Yeah, Marty's pretty funny. Like, but
I don't listen to radio.
Oh, he used to be part of he was on Nova with Kate, Tim, and Marty, and like they were a team for 10 years. Like they had the #1 radio show for 10 years. Yeah. My frustration with this is, but. If a leftist can go out there and say horrendous things about Peter Dutton, like actually, I'll use that as an example. The left love to call Peter Dutton Voldemort or potato because he has alopecia, he has no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and no hair. If you said that to a woman, let alone a left-leaning woman, can you imagine? Picking on Dutton because he's unattractive in your eyes,
it might get you slapped by Will Smith at the Oscars. I mean, that's how serious it could get if you mentioned alopecia.
Well, right, but this is the thing. Like, it's the same situation. And then just like I think it was like last weekend or the weekend before, Peter Garrett from Midnight Oil. Do you remember that band?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And the old has-beens now, as far as I'm concerned. But Peter Garrett gets up there and says, "Dance like you're dancing on the grave of Gina Rinehart." That's okay.
Oh, because that's tasteful. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's okay. That's acceptable because, again, the left can call for assassinations. The left can call for death. The left can uphold criminals. But anyone else outside of their think bubble, their game. You lose your job.
This is actually another dimension of virtuous corruption. Sorry that I keep on bringing things back to things that we've already mentioned before, but one of the other aspects of virtuous corruption is essentially what you're doing is you're saying my cause is so noble that I can engage in corruption, right? Yeah. I'm allowed to. But the close cousin of that is to say I'm so virtuous in these areas, I can give myself a pass to be kind of mean and nasty and evil in these other areas. And so the two really do actually go hand in hand. These people, they're so pious in their own sort of theology, their own worldview. They're so virtuous. These are like celebrities say, well, I travel the world speaking about the evils of climate change. Yeah, you travel on your private jet, as one of the world's greatest hypocrites. Oh, but you don't understand. I'm doing it for climate change. And so they can turn a blind eye to what even they define as evil, in this case, CO2 emissions, because they're so virtuous in other areas. And the left, unfortunately, because it's an ideology based on a false virtue, it is based on a humanism-derived form of virtue and value system, they see themselves as so virtuous that they can give themselves permission to be absolutely horrible human beings in ways that they would never accept from you or I, because we're not virtuous. We don't have the virtue, so we're not allowed to be evil and mean like that. It's sort of baked into the cake, unfortunately.
Well, since we're wrapping up, let's end with good news. Maybe we should sandwich this podcast because I have good news. Well, literal good news, not my good news. V8 engines are back. Yeah, it's time to burn some dinosaurs because V8 engines are back.
Burn the dinosaurs. Okay.
I was like, hang on. Can I just tell you, I grew up on V8s. My religion is V8s. So the fact that they're back,
See, my religion is V10s, so I'm better than you by 2.
You can't drive those friggin' Formula Ones on Australian roads, can you?
Okay, but you can get an Audi R8 with a V10 or a Lamborghini Huracan with a V10. There are some options out there. Or actually, there was a generation of BMW M5 that had a V10. Ask me how I know, because I worship V10. No, not literally. But I know where to find V10s. I know where they are in the Australian motoring scene. No, so this is hilarious because the death of the V8 engine has been predicted so many times, and the death of big engines, it's kind of becoming like the end of ice in the Arctic. You know, the ice-free Arctic that's been predicted over and over and over again, never actually comes true. The end of the big engine has been predicted over and over and over again and never comes true. Now, this is really significant though, because BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, Volvo, all of them had made commitments towards electrification. Their commitments were different. The timeline was different, and what it meant was this hybrid vehicles, was it full electrification with no internal combustion, etc. They all made these promises. Most of them were making promises based around 2035, broadly speaking. They were all different, but most of them were saying no pure petrol vehicles by 2035. And in order to make that work, their high-performance vehicles were becoming hybrids. So you'd get a four-cylinder turbocharged engine with a hybrid system in an AMG, CLS 45 or whatever it might be. Okay. Now they're saying, actually, we're going to keep the big stonking V8s. Mercedes are saying even the V12s in their flagship cars. This is wonderful, wonderful news, because even Bentley were actually really threatening to go the way of full electrification. I'm yet to see them change their stance. But Bentley is a brand that I have a lot of time for, and if I'm ever financially successful enough, I'm going to buy my wife a Bentley one day. And I do not want it to be electric. I want it to have the big stonking W16 engine in the front. So I'm super happy. This is a return of sanity, and it goes hand in hand with the collapse of demand for electric vehicles. Now, yes, electric vehicles are selling still quite well because of all the cheap Chinese ones that are coming in. That are probably being sold below cost and subsidized by the Chinese government, probably because they want the ability to turn them off if ever there was a conflict. Just saying. But electric vehicles are still selling reasonably well, but the actual value of the vehicles being sold is diving fast. And so the size of the market cap is dropping. One final point on that. Bank Australia have come out and said that they will not refinance any new vehicle that isn't pure electric. And so we're going to get another test of the go woke, go broke theory. Correct. Right. They're putting that to the test right now. Will this hurt their bottom line or not? Well, we'll see how this unfolds over the next 2 years or so until they change their mind, because every other company that's tried to stunt like this in the past has changed their mind.
Well, you know what's madness about this? Like the V8 engine and things like that. Like that was an Australian thing. V8 supercars, Bathurst, and we can go to Bathurst next week because about Mount But like when I heard, right, like I'm a Ferrari zealot. Ferrari announces the F80, which is like the next elite supercar, and it's got a V6 in it. Like I don't care that's an election. Like I don't want a Ferrari with a V6. Are you joking?
Have you heard it? Have you heard it?
No.
I'm sorry. As a Ferrari girl, it's going to hurt you. When you hear it, it's going to hurt you. I'm sorry.
Mate, it breaks my heart. Like I grew up worshipping the F40. Then we had the LaFerrari and the Enzo. I'm like, and now you're giving me a V6? And then what are you doing?
So the pinnacle of Ferrari for me would be a manual transmission Ferrari F430.
Okay.
Yeah, it's only a V8. It's not one of the V12s, but it's a rear-engined, lightweight. And before they started to get all tricky with all their electronics and all that kind of nonsense. But for me, actually, the car that I actually go gaga over is a Pagani Zonda, which has a naturally aspirated AMG-derived V12 in the back of it. Yes, okay, I'd love to say the McLaren F1, but they're so out of reach. I mean, a Pagani Zonda is out of reach as well, but the McLaren F1 is so far out of reach.
You know the person who owns the one in Australia, so there you go.
Yeah, there you go. No, so I'm a petrol head. I think we should be pumping CO2 back into the atmosphere as quickly as we possibly can. I think everyone that buys a Yank tank with a V8 or, yes, okay, fine, drives a Jeep with off-road tires that burns through.
You know, that's my plan. So G and I, like, this is the best part about having a boyfriend in motorsport is, like, I want the V8 supercharged Hemi engine in my car. And we're going to do it. That's the plan. So I am putting that V8 engine into Dexter, and like I just cannot wait. That is the plan.
Can the drive shafts handle it? If it's not built for it?
You're just going to change the gearbox and the engine, but yeah.
Change the gearbox. Yeah, wow. Okay.
Because they make them in the US, but Australia, being Australia, I was like, no, we won't have them here. But you imagine, and I am going to drive it and be so obnoxious and loud and offend everyone, and I'm going to be so happy about it.
Did I send you? I think I did. When I was in the US in February last year, I did a podcast with Robert Breedlove, the crypto guy. Did I send you the video I took of his car?
Massive truck.
Big black, I think it's an F350 or an F450 or I don't know, something stupidly big, massively lifted. This thing is hilarious. And he knows it's hilarious. Like he was taking the piss out of himself when he bought it, but he's like, I've made lots of money. I'm just going to buy the thing I want. It is hilarious. We pulled into an American car park, and I'm not making this up. American car parks have big spots because they've got a lot of F-150s, 250s, that sort of stuff. We took up 4 spots. He had to park on the center line and have the car spreading out over 4 spots in order to park this thing. It was hilarious. And the looks you get from everyone else in their cars, even like you see these other people coming the other way in their big, impressive truck, and they're looking and they clock you and they just, their face is kind of like, I've been outdone. I lost.
I love it. When I saw that today, I was like, because you know what happens, like, it'll come back. Like, I think what they did to Formula One, downgrading the engines, was heartbreaking.
It's criminal. It's criminal. Yeah.
Like, I want my ears to be split open when I'm at the Grand Prix.
There is now no reason to attend the Grand Prix in person because you get better coverage and you have a better idea of what's going on when you're there. When you're watching on TV. You have a much better perspective. The only reason to go there is for that ear-shattering, soul-ripping
like everything sound. Shakes. You feel your brain shake around there. Yeah. Do you know what? Grand Prix has just been co-opted now by a bunch of influencers and socialites. Like, I couldn't think of anything less I'd want to do than go to the Grand Prix. I used to go in the 90s. Like, when Melbourne first got it, my dad went every year, and then because I was just like Ferrari crazy girl, we used to go, and they used to have the big motor show on at the same time.
Yeah,
And we go to the Grand Prix, and I just sit there watching Schumacher. That was my favorite thing to do. Every year it rolled around, and I don't care anymore. Like, man.
I still remember the first year that Mark Webber raced. So we had an Australian driver at last. He was with a team called Mardi, which were a back market team, had no real chance of winning. The team was owned by an Australian bloke called Paul Stoddart. And they started, and I think it was into the first corner, but it might have been into the third corner. They had the biggest crash in Australian Grand Prix history. Took out a heap of cars, about half the field taken out in one crash. And Mark Webber managed to come 6th, which was the last points-paying position at the time in Formula One. They only paid points to the top 6. And I remember seeing them celebrating like he'd just won the world championship. I mean, it was intoxicating. It was brilliant. So yes, the glory days of Formula One. But if they could bring that sound back, I will go back to going every year. I'll make the pilgrimage every single year, but not until that sound comes back.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. But I was saying to G last night, like, things are shifting back. It's just happening at a glacial pace. I think coming out and saying, hey,
I disagree. I think it's happening on the scale of cultural movements. This is phenomenally fast. This is faster. The change we're watching now is happening faster than the sexual revolution of the mid to late 60s.
Yeah, wow.
We are watching, I think, one of the fastest cultural shifts in history because we're so connected now, because social contagion is a thing and it can be a force for good as well as for bad. We are discovering what's happening around the world, and then it's emboldening people much more rapidly. I think we're seeing one of the fastest cultural shifts in history. But having said that, it's still a 10-year project. Like, it's not, it doesn't happen overnight.
We were talking about this last night. Maybe we can end on this, but the reason it feels so chaotic is because we are in a revolution. Like in 10 years' time, we'll look back and go, oh my God, that was the such and such revolution, right? Whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
But we are in the throes of a revolution, which means some days you win, some days you don't. And it's going to feel like this. You're on a seesaw, you're out at sea, you don't know what's going on.
Correct.
That's why it feels so discombobulating at the moment.
In 40 years, we will be telling these stories to disinterested grandkids or grandnieces and nephews or whatever. Like, they won't want to hear it. And they'll be like, oh, there goes granddad again telling us about the war. Right? Like, this is what we're going to be telling people about.
Yeah. There was a time when men used to say they were women, and we had to believe them.
Like, before that, there was a time when men were men, but we went through this phase. It was really weird. No, this is history in the making. We're watching history get written. Donald Trump will end up being one of the most significant United States presidents in history, in my opinion. And I think we are watching no less than a rebirth of the American Republic, and that in itself is neither here nor there, good or bad. A republic in and of itself, it has no moral value. But what we're seeing is a return to the roots that made the American Republic the most successful experiment in freedom in the history of the world. And that is hugely significant and is literally reshaping the world for the better as we speak.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, should we wrap up there?
I think that's as good a place as any to leave it. Lovely talking to you. Sorry we couldn't make the scheduling work this week. We'll try and fix that next week. And if we can't, then we'll do this again and then we'll just keep going. Thank you for watching the podcast. Glad you're enjoying it. Please go and troll on Carly's page.
Carlz J. Slater on all platforms. And you are?
I'm at Topher Field on all platforms, but don't troll me. I've got enough. I've got all the pets I need. Go and troll Carly and we'll see you next week.
All right, guys. See ya.
Bye.